Hands behind your back. Now.
Officer, I'm telling you, you've got the wrong person.
I said hands behind your back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I need to reach for my...
The call came through dispatch at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night. Armed robbery at a convenience store on Archer Street. Suspect description: black male, approximately 6 feet tall, dark clothing, fleeing on foot northbound. Officer Derek Mills heard the call and immediately started scanning the streets. He had been with the department for 6 years and took pride in his arrest record. 3 blocks from the robbery scene, Mills spotted someone matching the description walking briskly down the sidewalk. Black male in a dark jacket, moving with purpose away from the crime scene. Mills didn't hesitate. He flipped on his lights and pulled his cruiser to the curb, already reaching for his radio to call in the stop. What Mills didn't know was that the man he was about to confront was FBI Special Agent Marcus Johnson, a decorated federal operative who had spent the last 8 months embedded undercover on a major corruption case. Johnson had been conducting surveillance on a suspected money laundering ring when the robbery alert sounded. He was heading back to his vehicle, unaware that he fit the description of an armed robber. Mills approached with his hand on his weapon, already convinced he had his man. Johnson saw the aggressive posture and immediately recognized that the situation was escalating dangerously. He slowly raised his hands, trying to de-escalate before things got worse. Mills ordered him to get into the patrol car. Johnson complied, calmly explaining that he was a federal agent and needed to show his credentials. Mills refused to listen. In his mind, this was textbook criminal behavior, claiming to be law enforcement to avoid arrest. He had heard that excuse a dozen times from suspects trying to talk their way out of handcuffs. Johnson remained calm, despite the situation spiraling out of control. He knew the statistics, knew the risks, knew that one wrong move could end fatally. He kept his hands visible and continued trying to reason with Mills, explaining that his FBI credentials were in his jacket pocket and could be easily verified. Mills wasn't interested in verification. He saw a suspect matching the description just 3 blocks from the robbery scene. To him, that was enough. Mills grabbed Johnson's arm, wrenched it behind his back, and slapped on handcuffs. Johnson protested. He knew this was a catastrophic mistake. Within minutes, backup arrived. Mills proudly announced he had apprehended the robbery suspect. Johnson repeated his claim to be an FBI agent, but Mills dismissed it as an elaborate lie. He told other officers that the suspect was being difficult and uncooperative, language that would later prove completely false when body camera footage was reviewed. Johnson was placed in the back of Mills' patrol car. Other officers began searching him, finding his wallet, his phone, and most importantly, his FBI credentials and service weapon. One of the backup officers, a younger cop named Stevens, pulled out Johnson's FBI identification card and badge. His face went pale. Stevens approached Mills and held out the credentials. Mills hesitated, eyes fixed on the ID. Instead of releasing Johnson or apologizing, Mills made the choice that ruined his career. He declared the credentials were fake. He insisted Johnson must have stolen or forged them. Mills demanded a full background check and ordered contact with the FBI field office. Johnson, still handcuffed in the patrol car, watched. His concern grew. He had given them the direct number to his supervisor at the FBI. He had provided his badge number and credentials. Mills, however, was doubling down on the arrest. He would not admit his mistake. The ride to the station took 15 minutes. Mills radioed ahead, reporting he was bringing a suspect impersonating a federal agent as well as tying him to the robbery, constructing a narrative to justify his decisions. What Mills didn't realize was that the FBI was already looking for Johnson. Johnson's FBI supervisor, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Patricia Ramirez, had been trying to reach him for the past 20 minutes. When an undercover agent goes dark without explanation, protocols kick in immediately. Ramirez had already initiated a locate procedure, pinging Johnson's phone and checking his last known position. When the ping showed he was stationary at the city police department's central booking facility, alarm bells went off. Ramirez called the police chief, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in quick succession. Within 30 minutes, federal authorities mobilized in response. At the police station, Mills was processing Johnson with the same routine he used for every arrest: fingerprints, photographs, and personal property inventory. Johnson remained cooperative but firm, repeatedly stating that Mills was committing a career-ending mistake and that federal authorities were likely already aware of his unlawful detention. The booking officer, a veteran with 20 years on the job, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. He had processed thousands of arrests and could usually tell within minutes whether someone was a criminal. Johnson didn't fit any profile. His demeanor was too calm, too professional. His knowledge of legal procedures was too precise, and those FBI credentials looked absolutely authentic. The booking officer suggested verifying Johnson's identity before proceeding. Mills bristled, taking it as an insult to his judgment. He insisted on charging Johnson for robbery, resisting arrest, and impersonating a federal officer. That's when Police Chief Raymond Foster walked into the booking area, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Behind him were two FBI agents in full tactical gear, and Patricia Ramirez, who walked straight to Johnson and began demanding answers about why her agent was in handcuffs. Mills watched his certainty crumble. Ramirez presented her credentials, verified Johnson's identity, then fixed Mills with an intense glare. She demanded to know why her agent was arrested, handcuffed, searched, and charged despite clear evidence to the contrary. Mills tried to explain the robbery suspect description about Johnson being in the area and about the matching physical characteristics. Ramirez cut him off and asked a simple question. Did you verify the robbery suspect's description beyond black male in dark clothing? Mills had no answer because he hadn't. The actual robbery suspect was shorter and heavier, wearing a red bandana and distinctive tattoos on both arms, none of which matched Johnson. Chief Foster ordered Johnson released immediately and personally removed the handcuffs. He apologized profusely while Ramirez documented everything with her phone camera. Mills was ordered to surrender his badge and weapon, pending an immediate internal investigation. The booking officer who had tried to warn Mills quietly slipped the arrest paperwork into evidence bags, knowing it would be needed for the federal investigation that was surely coming. The real robbery suspect was captured within 20 minutes, 2 miles away, by officers who noted the exact description. Mills, too eager for an arrest, had ignored critical details and grabbed the first black man he saw nearby. Johnson was escorted out of the police station by FBI personnel. His undercover operation was now compromised. Local police had his real identification on file. Months of work, building relationships, gathering evidence, were potentially destroyed. All because Mills had made assumptions based on race. He rushed to judgment. The FBI opened an official civil rights investigation that same night. Federal prosecutors began reviewing Mills' arrest history to identify patterns. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 4 years, Mills had arrested black men at a rate 7 times higher than his colleagues working the same districts. His arrest reports frequently contained phrases such as matched description and furtive movements without adequate justification. Investigators discovered that Mills had received multiple complaints about racial profiling, but supervisors had dismissed them without proper investigation. One complaint from 2 years earlier described almost the exact same scenario. A black professional stopped near a crime scene, arrested despite having identification, and held for hours before being released without charges when his story was verified. Dr. Raymond Cooper, an emergency room physician, had been arrested by Mills while walking to his car after a night shift. Mills had claimed Cooper matched the description of a car theft suspect. Cooper had provided his hospital ID, his medical license, and the keys to his own vehicle, but Mills had arrested him anyway. The charges were dropped the next day, but Cooper had spent 6 hours in jail and missed his daughter's birthday celebration. He had filed a complaint that went nowhere. Attorney Michelle Torres had been stopped by Mills outside her law office. He claimed she was trespassing, despite her having keys to the building and her name on the office directory. She spent 3 hours detained before her law partners arrived and threatened legal action. Her complaint had also been dismissed. Business owner Kenneth Wright had been handcuffed outside his own restaurant by Mills, who claimed Wright looked suspicious while checking the doors after closing. Wright owned 3 successful restaurants and had been conducting his normal closing procedures, something he had done for 15 years. His complaint received a form letter response and no follow-up. The pattern was undeniable, and Agent Johnson's arrest had finally brought it into the light, where it could no longer be ignored. The FBI's investigation moved with the speed and thoroughness that only federal agencies can muster when one of their own has been wronged. Within 72 hours, investigators had compiled a devastating report documenting Mills's 4-year pattern of discriminatory arrests. The evidence was so overwhelming that the U.S. Attorney's Office fast-tracked the case for prosecution. Agent Johnson, meanwhile, had to be completely extracted from his undercover assignment. The corruption case he had been building was reassigned to other agents, but critical momentum had been lost. The FBI calculated that Mills's reckless arrest had cost the government approximately $400,000 in wasted investigative resources and potentially allowed several suspects to escape prosecution. This financial impact would become crucial in the federal case against Mills. Mills was placed on unpaid administrative leave within a week of Johnson's arrest. His attorney tried to frame the incident as an honest mistake made under high pressure. This defense evaporated when prosecutors presented the body camera footage, showing Mills dismissing Johnson's credentials, ignoring backup officers' concerns, and fabricating details in his arrest report. The arrest report Mills had filed claimed Johnson had been verbally aggressive and physically resistant. The body camera footage showed Johnson had been calm, cooperative, and professional throughout the entire encounter. Mills had lied in an official document, adding obstruction of justice to his growing list of legal problems. Federal prosecutors charged Mills with deprivation of rights under color of law, filing false reports, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The conspiracy charge stemmed from evidence that Mills's supervisor, Lieutenant James Crawford, had been aware of previous complaints, but had actively suppressed them to protect Mills' arrest statistics. The department used Mills' high arrest numbers in funding requests and community presentations. Crawford had coached Mills on how to write reports that would justify questionable stops and searches. Emails between Crawford and Mills discussed strategies for managing complainers and protecting our numbers. These communications proved that the misconduct extended beyond a single rogue officer to a systemic failure at the supervisory level. The trial lasted 4 weeks and became a focal point for national discussions about racial profiling and police accountability. Agent Johnson testified for an entire day, describing in precise detail how Mills had violated his constitutional rights while ignoring every opportunity to verify his identity. His testimony was devastating because of his credibility as a decorated federal agent and his intimate knowledge of proper law enforcement procedures. The parade of other victims was equally damaging. Dr. Cooper testified about missing his daughter's birthday while sitting in the jail cell. Attorney Torres described the humiliation of being handcuffed outside her own law office in front of clients. Business owner Kenneth Wright explained how his false arrest had damaged his reputation in the community and cost him thousands in legal fees. Expert witnesses testified about implicit bias and racial profiling. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a leading researcher on police practices, analyzed Mills's arrest patterns and concluded they were statistically impossible without intentional racial targeting. She calculated that the probability of Mills's arrest patterns occurring randomly was less than 1 in 10 million. Mills took the stand in his own defense, and it destroyed what little remained of his case. Under cross-examination, he couldn't explain why he had ignored the robbery suspect's actual description. He couldn't justify dismissing Johnson's FBI credentials as fake without any investigation. He couldn't account for his pattern of arresting black professionals at rates far exceeding those of his colleagues. When prosecutors asked why he had lied in his arrest report about Johnson being aggressive and resistant, Mills claimed he had been mistaken under stress. The prosecutor then played the body camera footage, showing Mills calmly and deliberately fabricating details while writing his report hours after the arrest. Mills had no response. Lieutenant Crawford's testimony was equally disastrous. He admitted under oath that he had been aware of complaints against Mills, but had dismissed them because Mills got results. When asked what results meant, Crawford acknowledged that it meant high arrest numbers that made the department look productive to city administrators. He admitted he had never seriously investigated whether those arrests were constitutional or justified. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both Mills and Crawford. The courtroom, filled with Mills's victims and civil rights advocates, erupted in applause. The judge threatened to clear the room, but allowed the moment of catharsis for communities that had suffered under Mills's badge for years. Sentencing came 2 months later. Federal Judge Maria Sanchez had reviewed every piece of evidence, every victim statement, and every legal precedent. She noted that Mills had betrayed the oath he swore to uphold the Constitution and had used his position of trust to systematically violate the rights of citizens based solely on their race. Mills received 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. He was ordered to pay $180,000 in restitution to his documented victims and would forfeit his police pension entirely. Lieutenant Crawford received 7 years in federal prison for his role in enabling and covering up Mills's misconduct. The judge specifically noted that supervisors who protect bad officers are as culpable as the officers themselves. The civil lawsuit filed by Agent Johnson and the other victims resulted in a $14.5 million settlement from the city. Johnson received $4.2 million for the destruction of his undercover operation, violation of his civil rights, and the professional damage to his FBI career. The other plaintiffs divided the remaining settlement, with amounts ranging from $800,000 to $2.1 million, depending on the severity of their experiences. The consent decree imposed on the police department required complete restructuring of training, complaint investigation, and accountability systems. Every officer was required to undergo implicit bias training, and supervisors faced personal liability for failing to address misconduct. The department would remain under federal oversight for at least 15 years. Mills's appeals were denied at every level. His attorneys argued the sentence was excessive, but appellate courts found it entirely appropriate given the systematic nature of his civil rights violations and his abuse of federal authority by falsely arresting an FBI agent. From his federal prison cell, Mills watched as the department he had worked for was completely transformed. New leadership implemented community policing initiatives, civilian oversight boards gained real authority, and the culture of protecting problem officers was systematically dismantled. The changes came too late for his victims, but would protect countless future citizens from experiencing similar injustices. Agent Johnson eventually returned to active duty with the FBI, though in a different capacity. His experience led him to specialize in civil rights investigations, using his first-hand knowledge of police misconduct to build cases against other departments with similar problems. He became one of the Bureau's most effective investigators in this field. The intersection where Mills had stopped Johnson became an unofficial landmark in discussions about police reform. That single moment of decision, driven by racial bias and assumptions, had cost Mills everything: his freedom, his career, his pension, and his reputation. His choice to see a black man near a crime scene and immediately assume criminality, despite contrary evidence, had exposed a corrupt system and changed how police accountability would be enforced for years to come. Mills had 12 years to contemplate how his prejudices had destroyed multiple lives, including his own. The badge he had weaponized against innocent citizens was replaced by a prison uniform, and the power he had abused so casually was gone forever. Justice had been served, but the work of rebuilding trust and reforming broken systems would continue long after his cell door closed.
We've had reports of suspicious behavior. I need both of you to put your hands where I can see them.
The Saturday afternoon sun was bright when Judge Marcus Henderson heard the sharp command behind him. He had been walking home with his stepdaughter, Emma, her hand in his, both of them laughing about the ducks they'd just fed at the park. The ice cream she'd begged for was melting down the cone in her other hand. It was supposed to be a perfect day. The tone in that officer's voice made him freeze mid-step. What happened next would end a police career, spark a federal investigation, and expose a pattern of racist assumptions so deeply embedded that even an innocent walk in the park could trigger a nightmare. The body cam footage from that afternoon would be viewed over 30 million times, result in criminal charges, and prove that not even judges are safe from the most dangerous kind of prejudice. Judge Marcus Henderson wasn't just any target. At 48, he had served as a criminal court judge for the past 12 years, presiding over hundreds of cases ranging from theft to violent felonies. Before his appointment to the bench, he spent a decade as a defense attorney, earning a reputation for brilliance and integrity. He lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood with his wife Sarah and her daughter Emma from a previous marriage. Emma was 9 years old, blonde and blue-eyed, the light of his life since he'd married Sarah 5 years ago. That Saturday started like countless others. Judge Henderson had promised Emma a trip to Riverside Park, just 8 blocks from their home. They'd gone to feed the ducks, play on the swings, and get ice cream from the vendor near the fountain. It was their weekly tradition, something they'd been doing together since she was 4 years old. Nothing about their afternoon suggested trouble. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Officer Jason Mitchell spotted them walking along Oak Street. He was on patrol in his cruiser when he saw a well-dressed black man walking hand in hand with a young white girl. According to his later testimony, something about the scene struck him as wrong. He radioed for backup, claiming he'd observed suspicious interaction between an adult male and a minor child. The problem was that nothing suspicious was happening. A father and daughter walking home from the park. But Officer Mitchell's assumptions about who could be related to whom, based entirely on skin color, would set in motion a catastrophe. Officer Mitchell pulled his cruiser alongside them and stepped out. His hand was already on his weapon. His partner, Officer Ryan Chen, arrived within 90 seconds, responding to what Mitchell had described as a possible child endangerment situation. Both officers approached with an aggressive posture, immediately terrifying Emma. Judge Henderson felt his daughter's hand tighten in his. He had experienced racism before, had dealt with prejudice throughout his career, but he had never imagined something like this. Not while holding his child's hand. Not in his own neighborhood on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Officer Mitchell ordered him to step away from Emma. When Judge Henderson asked what the problem was, Mitchell repeated the command more forcefully. Emma started crying, confused and frightened by the officer's aggressive tone. She tried to move closer to her father, but Mitchell physically stepped between them. Judge Henderson maintained his composure despite the rage building inside him. He explained calmly that Emma was his stepdaughter, that they lived nearby, that they'd just been at the park. Officer Chen demanded identification from both of them. When Judge Henderson asked for the legal basis for the stop, Mitchell's response was chilling. "We've had reports of a black male attempting to lure children in this area. You match the description." There had been no such reports, no description, no legitimate reason for the stop. What Officer Mitchell had actually done was see an interracial family and make an assumption so vile, so rooted in racist stereotypes, that it would cost him everything. Judge Henderson reached slowly for his wallet, narrating every movement to avoid giving these clearly volatile officers any excuse to escalate. Emma was now sobbing, asking why the police were being mean to her daddy. Her distress only seemed to confirm the officers' suspicions, rather than dispel them. The handcuffs came off, but the damage was already done. Judge Henderson stood on that sidewalk, his wrists marked from the cuffs, his daughter traumatized, his wife in tears, and a crowd of neighbors who had just witnessed a judge being treated like a criminal. The officers stammered apologies that rang completely hollow. Officer Mitchell claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Officer Chen said they were just being cautious for the child's safety. Judge Henderson didn't accept any of it. He retrieved his phone and confirmed the audio recording had captured everything. He took the names and badge numbers of both officers. He got the social worker's information. He asked every witness who had filmed the incident to send their footage to his email address, which he provided on the spot. Within 20 minutes, he had documentation from 7 angles, capturing the entire encounter. Sarah drove Marcus and Emma home, while both officers remained at the scene, clearly panicking about what would happen next. Emma clung to her father during the entire drive, still shaking from what she'd witnessed. She asked why the police thought he was a bad man. She asked if they were going to come take her away. Judge Henderson held his daughter and promised her that he would make sure nothing like this ever happened again. By Monday morning, the FBI had opened a formal investigation. Judge Henderson filed a criminal complaint detailing every constitutional violation, every false accusation, every moment of terror his daughter had endured. Special Agent Lisa Park was assigned to the case, a veteran investigator who specialized in civil rights violations by law enforcement. She reviewed the audio recording, the witness videos, and the officers' own body cam footage, which contradicted their initial reports in multiple ways. The body cam footage was particularly damning. It showed Judge Henderson and Emma walking calmly, holding hands, the child clearly comfortable and happy. It captured Officer Mitchell's radio call reporting suspicious behavior, even though the video showed nothing out of the ordinary. It recorded the moment Mitchell pulled Emma away, despite her screaming for her father. Most devastating of all, it captured both officers discussing their assumption that a black man with a white child must be involved in something criminal. Officer Mitchell had actually told his partner, as captured on the body cam audio, that situations like this were always trouble. He'd said you couldn't be too careful with these kinds of situations. The racial subtext was unmistakable. The federal prosecutor assigned to review the case called it some of the most clear-cut evidence of racial profiling and rights violations he'd seen in 20 years. The investigation expanded rapidly. Agent Park discovered that Officer Mitchell had a history spanning 6 years, 14 complaints for racial profiling, all dismissed or buried by supervisors. One complaint came from a black businessman questioned for sitting in his own car outside his office. Another from a black woman detained for shopping in an upscale store where Mitchell assumed she didn't belong. The pattern was undeniable and had been ignored for years. Officer Chen's record showed 8 complaints over 4 years, including 3 incidents where he'd participated in stops that appeared to be based entirely on racial assumptions. Both officers had been protected by supervisors who valued loyalty over accountability, and now that entire system was about to collapse under federal scrutiny. The grand jury was convened within 4 weeks. 23 citizens heard testimony from Judge Henderson, watched Emma's traumatized reaction on video, and listened to expert witnesses explain exactly which federal laws had been shattered that Saturday afternoon. The deliberation lasted 6 hours. The indictments were crushing. Officer Mitchell faced 9 federal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law, unlawful detention, false arrest, child endangerment, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The child endangerment charge was particularly severe because his actions had directly traumatized Emma. Each charge carried serious prison time with the civil rights violations alone, punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison. Officer Chen faced 7 charges. His participation in the illegal detention and his failure to stop his partner's obvious misconduct made him equally culpable. The federal prosecutor made clear that officers who witness constitutional violations and do nothing are just as guilty as those who commit them directly. The Department of Justice announced that the entire police department would be placed under federal oversight for systemic civil rights violations. A consent decree would govern their operations for the next decade. The department's practices, training materials, and internal complaint procedures would all be completely restructured under federal supervision. The cost would exceed $8 million, all from the city's budget. The trial began 8 months after that Saturday afternoon. The courthouse was packed with civil rights organizations, media outlets, and community members demanding accountability. Judge Henderson testified for 7 hours across 3 days. He walked the jury through every moment of the encounter, describing the terror of watching his daughter traumatized by armed officers. He explained how being handcuffed in front of Emma had damaged something fundamental in her sense of safety. Emma's therapist testified about the ongoing trauma the child had experienced. She had nightmares about police taking her away from her family. She was terrified whenever she saw officers in public. She required months of counseling to process what had happened. The jury heard how a simple walk home from the park had left lasting psychological scars on a 9-year-old child. Sarah Henderson testified about arriving to find her husband in handcuffs and her daughter hysterical. She described the officers' assumptions that she must be under duress or threatened, their complete inability to accept that their interracial family was legitimate. Her testimony left several jurors visibly angry. The defense attorneys tried desperately to argue that the officers had acted in good faith based on their training. That argument disintegrated when prosecutors showed that nothing in their training justified stopping a man and child walking calmly down the street. Expert witnesses explained that the officers had violated every standard of reasonable suspicion and probable cause. A child psychology expert testified that the officers' actions constituted a form of abuse against Emma. The verdict came after 12 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. Officer Mitchell convicted on 9 federal charges. Officer Chen convicted on 7. The maximum combined sentence they faced was over 25 years in federal prison. Judge Henderson sat quietly in the courtroom as the verdict was read, holding Sarah's hand, finally vindicated. The sentencing hearing was held 6 weeks later. Federal Judge Diana Torres had reviewed every piece of evidence and every victim impact statement. She called the case one of the most egregious examples of racial profiling she had encountered, made worse by the trauma inflicted on an innocent child. Judge Henderson gave a victim impact statement focusing on Emma. He described how his daughter had been changed by what these officers did, how she flinched when she saw police cars, how she asked questions no 9-year-old should have to ask about why some people would think her daddy was dangerous just because of his skin color. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Judge Torres sentenced Officer Mitchell to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Officer Chen received 11 years. Both would serve time in facilities far from their home state. The sentences were among the harshest ever imposed for racial profiling, sending shockwaves through law enforcement nationwide. The civil lawsuit settled for $18 million, the largest police misconduct settlement in the state's history. But Judge Henderson insisted the money wasn't the point. The settlement included mandatory reforms, body cameras with footage reviewed by civilian oversight, complete overhaul of training programs to address implicit bias, an independent civilian review board with real disciplinary power, and a requirement that all complaints be investigated by outside agencies rather than internal affairs. Judge Henderson helped design these reforms, using his position and expertise to ensure meaningful change. The department was transformed from the ground up. The culture of protecting bad officers was replaced by strict accountability. Complaint investigations became transparent. Training focused on community policing and constitutional rights. Officer Mitchell began serving his sentence in protective custody after threats from other inmates. His family abandoned him within months. Officer Chen's experience was similar. 11 years isolated from the general population, with his career and reputation destroyed. Judge Henderson returned to the bench with a renewed focus on holding officers accountable for violating constitutional rights. He became a national voice for police reform, speaking at law enforcement academies and civil rights conferences. His message was always the same. If this could happen to a judge, what happens to ordinary citizens who lack resources to fight back? The case became a landmark in civil rights law and is studied in law schools nationwide. The footage of Emma screaming for her father while being pulled away was used in police training programs to show the human cost of racist assumptions. The message was clear. Racial profiling destroys lives, traumatizes children, and carries devastating consequences. Two officers thought they could act on their prejudices without accountability. They were catastrophically wrong. Judge Marcus Henderson proved that actions have consequences, that even judges aren't immune to racism, and that fighting back can change entire systems. His courage didn't just send two men to prison for over a decade. It transformed a police department and sent a message nationwide. Sometimes justice is slow. Sometimes it's uncertain. But when brave people stand up and demand accountability, it can be absolutely devastating to those who thought they were untouchable. Security footage from a Walmart in suburban Phoenix shows a woman in business casual clothing walking down aisle 12 at 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Her name is Sarah Chen, 29 years old, software developer, living alone in a rental house 2 miles from this store because she relocated for work 8 months ago. What she doesn't know is that the man in the gray hoodie 3 aisles over isn't shopping. He's watching. In the next minutes of footage, you're going to see exactly how someone becomes a target in a public place. And when you understand what Sarah missed that day, you'll realize this could happen to anyone. This is the story of how a woman's daily routine became a hunting pattern for someone who studied her movements for 9 days. And when you see what was found in that rental car, you'll understand why Sarah still checks every door lock 3 times before sleeping. Most people think stalkers are obvious. Heavy breathing, dark sunglasses, suspicious behavior that makes everyone notice. That's what makes sense, right? Someone following you would be noticeable. That's what Sarah thought too. Wrong. The truth is, predators blend in because standing out defeats the purpose. The man in the Walmart wore a gray hoodie and jeans. He carried a shopping basket with 3 items in it. He looked at his phone like everyone else. He was 34 years old, drove a white sedan, and Sarah would never be able to identify his face. November 3rd. Sarah's first day noticing something wrong. She's walking through Walmart after work, buying groceries for the week. She stops in the cereal aisle at 6:47 p.m., spends 2 minutes deciding between brands. When she turns her cart around, there's a man at the end of the aisle. Gray hoodie. He's looking at something on the shelf, but his body is angled toward her. She thinks nothing of it. It's a grocery store. People shop. She moves to the next aisle. He's there 30 seconds later. Different section. But there. She checks out at 7:03 p.m., walks to her car, drives home. Forgets about it completely. November 4th. Sarah leaves work at 5:30 p.m., drives her usual route home, takes Baseline Road to 48th Street, turns left on her residential street. As she's pulling into her driveway, she glances in her rearview mirror. There's a white sedan 3 houses down. It wasn't there this morning. She notices because her street doesn't get much traffic. 8 houses, all single-family rentals. Most people park in their garages. The sedan is parked on the street, engine off. She can't see anyone inside from this distance. She goes into her house, checks the window 15 minutes later. The car is gone. November 6th. Friday evening. Sarah stops at a coffee shop after work, something she does every Friday. She orders her usual, sits by the window working on her laptop for 40 minutes. When she leaves at 6:15 p.m., she walks to her car in the small parking lot behind the building. That's when she sees him. Gray hoodie, same height and build as the man from Walmart. He's walking across the parking lot, heading toward a white sedan. She can't see his face because his hood is up, and he's looking down at his phone. But something about his movement pattern makes her stomach turn. He gets in the car, sits there, doesn't start the engine. Sarah sits in her own car, keys in hand, watching him in her rearview mirror. After 90 seconds, he starts the engine and drives away. She tells herself she's being paranoid. White sedans are common, gray hoodies are common, men looking at phones are common. There's nothing unusual about any of it except the feeling in her chest that says something is wrong. November 8th, Sunday night. Sarah is walking her usual evening route through the neighborhood, something she does 3 times a week for exercise. She's on the main road when she notices a white sedan driving slowly behind her, staying about 50 feet back. When she turns onto her street, the sedan turns too. When she walks faster, it maintains the same distance. She's 4 houses from home when the sedan suddenly accelerates, drives past her, and disappears around the corner. She runs the rest of the way to her front door. November 9th. Sarah calls the non-emergency police line. She explains what's been happening. The dispatcher is polite but clear. A white sedan driving on public streets isn't illegal. A man shopping in the same aisles isn't a crime. Without a direct threat or proof of stalking behavior, there's nothing they can do. She should call 911 if she feels in immediate danger. Sarah hangs up feeling stupid. Maybe she is paranoid. Maybe it's coincidence. She works from home that day, doesn't leave the house. She checks the street every 30 minutes. No white sedan. By evening, she's convinced herself she overreacted. November 10th. Tuesday. Sarah has a team meeting she can't miss. Drives to the office. The day is normal. She leaves at 5:45 p.m., takes her usual route home. Traffic is heavy. She's sitting at a red light on Baseline Road when she glances in her side mirror. 3 cars back. White sedan. Same model she's seen before. She can't see the driver because of the angle and the other vehicles. The light turns green. She drives. The sedan follows. She changes lanes. 2 minutes later, it changes lanes. She turns onto her street. It doesn't follow. She sits in her driveway for 5 minutes, engine running, watching her rearview mirror. Nothing. She goes inside, locks the front door, checks every window lock. She texts her coworker Michael about maybe staying over, then deletes it. She doesn't want to sound crazy. At 9:30 p.m., she's getting ready for bed when she hears something. A car engine. She goes to her living room window, looks through the curtain. There's a vehicle parked 4 houses down, lights on, engine running. It's dark, and the streetlight nearest to it is burned out, has been for 2 weeks. She can't see the color or model clearly. She watches for 8 minutes. The vehicle doesn't move. The lights stay on. She pulls out her phone, considers calling 911, puts it down. A parked car isn't an emergency. At 9:41 p.m., the lights turn off. The car sits in darkness for another 3 minutes, then drives away slowly. Sarah doesn't sleep that night. She keeps her phone next to her bed. She checks the window every hour. At 3:18 a.m., she goes through her house and verifies every lock. Front door deadbolt. Check. Back door deadbolt. Check. All windows locked. Check. She finally falls asleep at 4:30 a.m., November 11th. Wednesday. Sarah works from home again. She orders delivery instead of going to the store. She doesn't go outside. At 7:15 p.m., she's eating dinner when she sees movement through her kitchen window. Someone is walking between houses across the street, cutting through yards. Gray hoodie. She drops her fork. He's not looking at her house. He's walking parallel to the street, staying in the shadows between properties. She watches him pass 3 houses, then disappear behind a fence. She calls 911. The dispatcher sends an officer. He arrives 22 minutes later, searches the area, finds nothing. He takes her report, tells her to call immediately if she sees the person again. That night, Sarah moves a chair against her front door. She puts a baseball bat next to her bed. She leaves lights on in 3 rooms. She sets her phone to emergency dial. She lies in bed staring at the ceiling until 2 a.m., November 12th, Thursday. Sarah doesn't remember falling asleep, but she wakes up at 8:47 a.m. to her alarm. She works from her dining room table. At 11:30 a.m., she looks out her front window. White sedan, parked 6 houses down on the opposite side of the street. Same spot as 2 nights ago. She watches it for 45 minutes. Nobody gets out. Nobody gets in. At 12:18 p.m., it drives away. She calls the police non-emergency line again. They say they'll increase patrols in her area. She doesn't feel better. At 9 p.m., she's checking her door locks for the 3rd time when she sees it. The white sedan, parked in the exact same spot. Lights off this time. She can barely see it in the darkness. She stands at her window watching for 20 minutes. Nothing moves. At 9:47 p.m., the car is still there. Sarah makes a decision. She's not sleeping in this house tonight. She packs a bag, grabs her laptop, heads to her front door. She unlocks it, looks out through the peephole. The street looks empty. She opens the door. The white sedan's lights turn on. Engine starts. Sarah slams the door, locks it, runs to her bedroom. She hears the car drive away. She calls Michael from work. No answer. She calls her manager. Voicemail. She calls 911. Dispatcher says an officer will come by when one is available. High priority calls tonight. Sarah drags her dresser in front of her bedroom door. She sits on her bed with the baseball bat. She waits. At 10:33 p.m., her phone dies. She forgot to charge it. She plugs it in, watches the screen, waits for it to power on. It takes 3 minutes. When it does, she has 2 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemail. The calls came in at 10:28 p.m. and 10:31 p.m., while her phone was dead. She blocks the number. She keeps the bat in her hands. She doesn't move the dresser. She sits there until midnight. Then exhaustion takes over. She falls asleep sitting up, bat across her lap. November 13th, Friday. Sarah wakes at 6:42 a.m. Her neck hurts from sleeping sitting up. Her phone shows no new calls. She moves the dresser, checks every room in her house. Everything is locked. Everything looks normal. She makes coffee, sits at her kitchen table, stares at nothing. At 8:15 a.m., she calls a locksmith. She wants better locks on both doors. The locksmith can come Monday. She says that's fine. She calls a security company about cameras and motion sensors. Earliest appointment is next Wednesday. She books it. She works from home. At 3:30 p.m., she goes outside to check her mailbox. First time leaving the house in 2 days. The street is quiet. No white sedan, no gray hoodie. She gets her mail, walks back inside, locks the door immediately. She opens the mail. Bills, advertisements, a flyer for lawn service. At 8 p.m., she orders pizza delivery. The driver arrives at 8:34 p.m. She watches through the window as he parks, gets out, walks to her door. He's young, wearing the pizza company uniform. She opens the door with the chain still on, takes the pizza through the gap, hands him cash, closes the door. At 10:15 p.m., she checks all her locks again. Front door, deadbolt engaged. Back door. She walks to the back door in her kitchen, the one that leads to her small backyard. She reaches for the deadbolt. It's unlocked. She hasn't used the back door in 4 days. She specifically remembers locking it on November 9th, when she checked every lock in the house. She locked it again on November 11th after the officer left. She knows she locked it. She stands there staring at the unlocked deadbolt for 11 seconds. Then she locks it, tests it 3 times, walks backward away from it. She grabs her phone, calls 911. She tells them someone unlocked her back door. Dispatcher asks if anyone is in the house. Sarah says she doesn't know. Dispatcher tells her to leave immediately, wait outside for officers. Sarah grabs her keys and runs to the front door. She unlocks it, pulls it open, steps outside. She's moving toward her car when she hears it. A sound from inside her house. A door closing. The back door. She runs. She gets in her car, locks the doors, starts the engine. She's backing out of her driveway when she sees him. A figure moving along the side of her house, coming from the backyard. Gray hoodie. He's not running. He's walking calmly toward the street. She can't see his face. He reaches the sidewalk, turns left, walks away. She sits in her car in the middle of the street, engine running, hands shaking. 30 seconds later, a white sedan appears from around the corner, drives slowly past her house, stops where the man is walking. He gets in the passenger side. The car drives away. Police arrive at 10:24 p.m. 3 officers. Sarah tells them everything. They search her house. Back door is locked now. No signs of forced entry. No signs anyone was inside. They check the door frame, the lock mechanism. No damage. They ask if she's sure she locked it. She says yes. They ask if anyone else has a key. She says no. The landlord has one, but he's never come by unannounced. Officers check the backyard. They find shoe prints in the dirt near the back door. Men's size 10 or 11. Fresh. Made within the last few hours based on clarity. They photograph them. They dust the back door for prints. They find smudges. Nothing usable. Sarah tells them about the white sedan, the license plate she couldn't read because of distance and darkness. She tells them about the man in the gray hoodie. She gives them the dates, the locations, everything. They take her statement. They file a report. They tell her to stay somewhere else tonight. She says she will. At 11:45 p.m., Sarah is sitting in her car outside a hotel when her phone rings. Unknown number. Different from the one that called 2 nights ago. She doesn't answer. It rings 4 times, then stops. No voicemail. She books a room, goes inside, locks the door, pushes a chair against it. November 14th, Saturday morning. Detective Maria Gonzalez calls Sarah at 9:30 a.m. She's been assigned to Sarah's case. She wants to meet. They meet at a coffee shop at 10:15 a.m. Detective Gonzalez is 43, 17 years on the force, specializes in stalking cases. She tells Sarah the shoe prints match a common brand sold at Walmart and Target. She tells Sarah the white sedan description matches 8,000 vehicles registered in the Phoenix metro area. She tells Sarah without a license plate or clear face identification, there's no way to locate the suspect. She asks Sarah if she has any ex-boyfriends, former co-workers, anyone who might have a reason to target her. Sarah says no. She moved here 8 months ago. She doesn't date. She works from home mostly. She doesn't have conflicts with anyone. Detective Gonzalez nods. She says this looks like a stranger predator situation. Someone who selected Sarah randomly, studied her patterns, tested her security. She says the unlocked back door suggests he had access to her house at some point. Either he picked the lock or had a key made somehow. She tells Sarah these cases are difficult to solve without the suspect making a mistake. She tells Sarah to stay alert, vary her routines, install security systems, consider moving. Sarah asks what happens next. Detective Gonzalez says they'll monitor the area, check for similar reports, follow up on any leads. But without more evidence, there's not much they can do. November 15th, Sunday. Sarah stays in the hotel. She calls her landlord, explains she needs to break the lease. He says there's a penalty. She says she'll pay it. She starts looking for new apartments in different neighborhoods. November 18th, Wednesday. Security company installs cameras and motion sensors at Sarah's house. She's not living there anymore, but she's still paying rent until she can move. The cameras cover front door, back door, and both sides of the house. Motion sensors on all windows and doors. Everything connects to her phone. November 20th, Friday. Sarah is at the house packing her belongings when her phone alerts. Motion detected. Back door. She opens the app. The camera shows someone standing at her back door. Gray hoodie. He's facing the camera, but his hood is up, and a medical mask covers his face. He stands there for 6 seconds looking directly at the camera. Then he turns and walks away. Sarah calls 911. She calls Detective Gonzalez. She sends them the footage. Officers arrive, search the property. He's gone. They review the footage. The man approached from the alley behind Sarah's house, walked directly to the back door, stood there, left. He didn't try to open it. He didn't touch it. He just stood there looking at the camera. Detective Gonzalez tells Sarah he was sending a message. He knows she has cameras now. He wanted her to know he's still watching. She tells Sarah to file for a restraining order. Sarah asks how she can file a restraining order against someone she can't identify. Detective Gonzalez says she's right. She tells Sarah she should leave Phoenix, start over somewhere else. November 22nd, Sunday. Sarah is loading boxes into a moving truck. She's going to Seattle. Her company approved a permanent remote work arrangement in a different region. She's leaving tonight. She's not telling anyone her new address except her parents and her manager. At 4:30 p.m., she's doing a final walkthrough of the house. She's in her bedroom when her phone alerts. Motion detected. Front door. She opens the app. The white sedan is parked in her driveway. Driver's door is open. Nobody visible. She runs to her front window, looks out. The sedan is there. Engine running. Driver's door open. No one around it. She's reaching for her phone to call 911 when she hears it. Sound from inside her house. Footsteps coming from her kitchen. The back door. He's inside. Sarah runs toward the front door. She's 10 feet away when he comes around the corner from the hallway. Gray hoodie, medical mask. He's 6 feet tall, average build. He's not rushing. He's walking toward her like he has all the time in the world. She screams. She grabs the baseball bat leaning against the wall, the one she's kept near her since November 9th. He keeps coming. She swings, connects with his left arm. He stumbles, reaches for her with his right hand. She swings again, hits his shoulder. He grabs the bat. They struggle. He's stronger, but she's fighting for her life. She kicks him in the knee. He buckles. She yanks the bat free, swings at his head. He moves. The bat hits his shoulder again. He falls backward, hits the wall. She swings again, connects with his ribs. She hears him make a sound, the first sound she's heard from him. A grunt of pain. He's on the ground. She raises the bat. He rolls away, gets to his feet. His left arm is hanging wrong. She broke something. He stumbles toward the back hallway. She follows. Bat raised. He reaches the back door, pulls it open. She swings one more time, hits his back. He falls through the doorway into the backyard. She slams the door, locks it, runs to the front door, gets outside to the street. She's screaming for help. Neighbors come out. Someone calls 911. Within 3 minutes, there are 6 people around her. Within 8 minutes, police arrive. Within 12 minutes, an ambulance and 4 more officers. They search her house and yard. He's gone. They find blood drops leading from her back door to the alley. They follow the trail. It ends at the street. The white sedan is gone from her driveway. They put out an alert. White sedan, driver possibly injured, bleeding. They find the rental car 4 hours later, abandoned in a Target parking lot 12 miles away. Blood in the driver's seat matches blood from Sarah's house. They run DNA. No match in any database. The rental agreement was fake. Driver's license was fake. Credit card was fake. The rental company's security footage shows a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, face not visible. They check hospital emergency rooms. No one matching his description and injuries came in that night. They check urgent care clinics. Nothing. He either treated himself or had help. They never find him. Detective Gonzalez tells Sarah he likely left the area. Injured, identified as a threat, he wouldn't risk staying. She tells Sarah she fought back better than most people could. She tells Sarah she's lucky to be alive. Sarah doesn't feel lucky. 2 weeks later, Sarah is in Seattle. New apartment, new locks, new security system. She doesn't go out alone at night. She doesn't park in the same spot twice. She doesn't follow routines. She checks her cameras 20 times a day. 3 months later, Detective Gonzalez calls. They found something. A storage unit in Tempe, rented under a fake name but matching the pattern of fake IDs from the rental car. Inside, they found photographs. 14 women. Different cities. Different states. Sarah's photo is there, printed from a distance, taken outside the coffee shop on November 6th. They don't know who the other 13 women are. They're working to identify them. Sarah asks if they found him. Detective Gonzalez says no. The storage unit was paid through December, then abandoned. They're monitoring it, but he's not coming back. She says Sarah did what 13 other women might not get the chance to do. She fought back. She survived. She injured him badly enough that he ran. It's been 9 months. Sarah still checks her locks 3 times. She still looks over her shoulder. She still flinches at gray hoodies and white sedans. But she's alive. And somewhere out there, he's walking around with injuries that didn't heal right. Injuries that hurt when it rains. Injuries that remind him that Sarah Chen fought back. And maybe that's enough to make him think twice before watching someone else. Or maybe it's not. Maybe he's already found woman number 15. Maybe he's being more careful now. Maybe he learned from his mistakes. That's what keeps Sarah awake. Not what happened to her. What might be happening to someone else. Someone who doesn't have cameras. Someone who doesn't have a baseball bat. Someone who won't see him coming until it's too late. If you live alone, check your back door. Change your routine. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Sarah Chen ignored that feeling for 9 days. On day 10, she almost died because of it. She was lucky. She was prepared. She fought back. The next person might not be. November 6th, 2019, 2:35 p.m. Security cameras capture a 25-year-old man purchasing zip ties and duct tape at a convenience store in Apopka, Florida. He pays cash. He leaves quickly. In less than an hour, these items will factor into one of the most disturbing child abuse cases Marion County has ever seen. But by the time investigators connect the dots, the evidence will have vanished. What they find instead will be far worse. A case manager at Advent Health Apopka in Florida alerted the Marion County Sheriff's Office on 6 November 2019. An 8-year-old girl has arrived at the emergency room with injuries that raise immediate red flags. The child is conscious but withdrawn, refusing to speak about what happened to her. Her body tells a different story than her silence suggests. The girl's mother, 33-year-old Rebecca Martinez, stands in the hospital corridor, visibly shaken. She explains to the intake nurse that her daughter, Sophia, returned home from school that afternoon, in tears. Rebecca had been at work when Sophia's bus dropped her off at their apartment complex. When Rebecca arrived home 2 hours later, she found Sophia locked in her bedroom, crying and holding her arms across her chest. Rebecca immediately noticed bruising on Sophia's upper arms and what appeared to be marks around her wrists. When she asked Sophia what happened, the child wouldn't answer. She only shook her head and continued crying. Rebecca checked Sophia's body more thoroughly and discovered additional bruising on her back and legs. That's when she called 911. The responding paramedics documented multiple contusions in various stages of healing, suggesting this wasn't an isolated incident. Some bruises appeared fresh, purple, and tender to the touch. Others had already begun yellowing, indicating they were several days old. The pattern was concerning enough to the medical team to involve law enforcement immediately. Detective Sarah Chen from the Marion County Sheriff's Office arrives at the hospital within 30 minutes of the call. She's worked child abuse cases for 7 years and recognizes the signs immediately: the bruising patterns, the child's traumatized silence, and the mother's genuine confusion about what happened. These elements point to abuse occurring outside the home, likely by someone the child knows and fears. Detective Chen begins her interview with Rebecca in a private consultation room. Rebecca explains that she's been divorced for 2 years and has been dating her boyfriend, 25-year-old Marcus Webb, for about 8 months. Marcus lives in his own apartment about 15 minutes from Rebecca's place. He works irregular hours at a warehouse and often stays over at Rebecca's apartment 3 or 4 nights per week. Rebecca insists that Marcus has been good with Sophia. He helps with homework sometimes, occasionally picks her up from school when Rebecca is working late, and has taken them both out for dinner and activities. Rebecca claims she's never seen Marcus be anything but patient with her daughter. She seems genuinely bewildered by the suggestion that someone might have intentionally hurt Sophia. Detective Chen asks Rebecca about Sophia's routine. The child attends Apopka Elementary School and usually takes the bus home, arriving at the apartment complex around 3:15 p.m. Rebecca works as a medical billing specialist and doesn't get home until after 5 p.m. most days. She explains that Sophia has a key and knows to go straight inside, lock the door, and start her homework. Rebecca calls to check on her every day around 4 p.m. But today was different. When Rebecca called at 4 p.m., Sophia didn't answer. Rebecca called 3 more times, but there was no response. Growing worried, Rebecca left work early and rushed home. That's when she found Sophia in her bedroom, injured and terrified. Detective Chen shifts the conversation to Marcus. Where was he today? Rebecca checks her phone and shows the detective their earlier text exchange. Marcus had messaged her around 2:30 p.m. asking if she needed him to pick up Sophia from school. Rebecca had declined, saying Sophia would take the bus as usual. Marcus replied that he was running errands anyway and could swing by. Rebecca again refused, stating she wanted Sophia to stick to her routine. This exchange catches Detective Chen's attention. Why would Marcus offer to pick up Sophia when Rebecca had already established that the child would take the bus? The detective asks Rebecca whether Marcus has a key to her apartment. Rebecca confirms that she gave him one about 3 months ago, so he could let himself in when he stayed over. Detective Chen requests Marcus's complete contact information and address. She also asks Rebecca not to contact Marcus until after the police have had a chance to speak with him. Rebecca agrees, but appears confused about why this is necessary. She maintains that Marcus couldn't be involved because he wasn't even at her apartment today. While Detective Chen interviews Rebecca, another detective attempts to speak with Sophia. The child sits in an examination room with a pediatric nurse and a child advocacy specialist. Sophia remains largely nonverbal, answering only yes or no questions with small nods or head shakes. When asked directly if someone hurt her, Sophia begins crying again. When asked if it was someone she knows, she nods. When asked if it was someone at school, she shakes her head no. The child advocacy specialist tries a different approach, asking Sophia to draw pictures of her day. Sophia draws a school bus, her apartment building, and a stick figure that appears to be herself. Then she draws another figure, taller than her stick figure, with angry eyes. The specialist asks who this person is. Sophia's hand starts shaking and she drops the crayon. The medical examination reveals the extent of Sophia's injuries. Beyond the visible bruising, the doctor discovers what appears to be grip marks on both of Sophia's upper arms, consistent with an adult forcefully grabbing and shaking her. Additional bruising on her back suggests she may have been pushed or thrown against something. The wrist marks indicate possible restraint. Most concerning are older injuries that suggest a pattern of abuse over time. The hospital photographs document everything thoroughly. The images will become crucial evidence in whatever investigation follows. The doctor's report concludes that the injuries are absolutely consistent with non-accidental trauma. There is no medical explanation for this pattern of bruising beyond intentional harm by another person. Detective Chen reviews the medical findings and makes a decision. She needs to speak with Marcus Webb immediately. However, she also needs to be strategic. If Marcus is responsible for Sophia's injuries, confronting him directly might cause him to lawyer up before they gather enough evidence. She needs probable cause for a search warrant of his apartment, but right now, all she has is suspicious timing and a traumatized child who won't speak. The detective pulls Sophia's school records and contacts the elementary school principal. She learns that Sophia's attendance has been spotty over the past 2 months. The child has missed 7 days of school, each time with notes from her mother citing illness. Rebecca claims Sophia had a cold, then a stomach bug, then another cold. The school nurse had made a note to follow up, but hadn't yet contacted Child Protective Services. Detective Chen also discovers that on 3 occasions in the past month, someone other than Rebecca picked Sophia up from school early. The sign-out sheet lists Marcus Webb as an authorized pickup person, added to Sophia's file 2 months ago with Rebecca's permission. Each time Marcus picked Sophia up, it was between 1 and 2 p.m., well before the regular school day ended. The detective contacts Rebecca again and asks about these early pickups. Rebecca seems surprised. She admits she authorized Marcus to pick up Sophia in emergencies, but she doesn't remember him actually doing so. Rebecca checks her work schedule and confirms she was at the office during each of those 3 dates. She never received any calls from the school or from Marcus about him picking Sophia up early. This information shifts everything. Marcus had access to Sophia without Rebecca's knowledge. He had taken the child from school multiple times without informing her mother. And now Sophia has returned home with injuries she won't explain, on a day when Marcus had offered to pick her up, despite Rebecca saying no. Detective Chen needs more before she can get a warrant. She sends 2 deputies to Marcus Webb's apartment complex to conduct what they call a knock and talk. It's a standard investigative technique where officers show up and ask to speak with someone. If the person refuses, that's their right. But often people will talk, especially if they think refusing makes them look guilty. The deputies arrive at Marcus's apartment around 7:30 p.m. They knock on the door. No answer. They knock again. Still nothing. A neighbor emerges from the adjacent unit and asks if there's a problem. The deputies explain they're looking for Marcus Webb. The neighbor says she saw Marcus come home around 6 p.m., but thought she heard him leave again about 20 minutes ago. The deputies thank the neighbor and return to their vehicle to wait. If Marcus is simply out running errands, he'll return. If he's avoiding them, that's information too. They settle in for surveillance, parking where they can see Marcus's front door and his assigned parking space. Back at the hospital, the child advocacy specialist makes a breakthrough with Sophia. Using anatomically correct dolls, she asks Sophia to show what happened without using words. Sophia hesitates, then slowly demonstrates someone grabbing the doll's arms and shaking it violently. She shows the doll being pushed down. She shows the doll's hands tightly clasped. Through this demonstration, Sophia communicates what she couldn't say out loud. The specialist gently asks Sophia where this happened. Sophia picks up a toy house and points to it, then shakes her head. She picks up a toy car and nods. The specialist asks if it happened in someone's car. Sophia nods. The specialist asks if it happened in someone's home. Sophia nods again. The specialist asks if it was her home. Sophia shakes her head. Another home. A home that isn't hers. Detective Chen receives this update while reviewing Marcus Webb's background check. He has no prior arrests, no criminal record, nothing that would have raised flags when Rebecca started dating him. He's worked at the same warehouse for 3 years, pays his bills on time, and by all accounts appears to be a regular young man. But Detective Chen knows that abusers don't always have criminal histories. Sometimes, this is their first time getting caught. Sometimes they've been careful enough to avoid detection until now. The detective focuses on building her case methodically. She obtains phone records for both Rebecca and Marcus through an emergency disclosure request based on the child abuse investigation. The documents show that Marcus called Rebecca 4 times today between 2:30 and 4 p.m. Rebecca answered twice and spoke briefly each time. The other 2 calls went to voicemail. The records also show Marcus's location data from his phone. He was near Sophia's school at 3 p.m., just as dismissal was about to start. His phone then traveled toward his apartment, arriving there at 3:25 p.m. It remained at that location until 6 p.m. Detective Chen now has a timeline. Sophia's bus arrived at her apartment complex at 3:15 p.m. Marcus's phone shows he was in the area at 3 p.m. and arrived at his own apartment by 3:25 p.m. If he intercepted Sophia somehow between the bus stop and her apartment, took her to his place, abused her, and returned her home. The timing would be tight, but possible. The detective needs something more concrete. She needs evidence that Sophia was actually at Marcus's apartment. She needs a reason to search that apartment beyond suspicion and timeline analysis. She needs probable cause that will convince a judge to issue a warrant. And then she gets the call she's been waiting for. At 9:47 p.m., Detective Chen receives a call from the deputies conducting surveillance at Marcus Webb's apartment. Marcus has returned, but he's not alone. He arrived with another man, and both appeared to be carrying cleaning supplies into the apartment. The deputies note that Marcus made 3 trips from his car, bringing in bottles of bleach, trash bags, and what appeared to be a carpet cleaning machine. Detective Chen immediately recognizes this behavior. Subjects attempting to destroy evidence often engage in excessive cleaning after learning police are looking for them. The question is, how Marcus knew they were investigating. The detective checks with Rebecca, who confirms she hasn't contacted Marcus. But Rebecca's mother had called earlier, and Rebecca had explained what happened with Sophia. The mother may have mentioned something to someone, and word traveled through social circles back to Marcus. The deputy watching Marcus's apartment reports additional activity. Through the first-floor window, He can see Marcus moving frantically around the living room. The other man appears to be helping him move furniture. This isn't normal evening behavior. This is someone who knows he's in trouble and is trying to eliminate anything that might incriminate him. Detective Chen makes a calculated decision. She drives to Marcus's apartment complex herself, bringing 2 additional detectives with her. They approach the door at 10:15 p.m. and knock firmly. The cleaning sounds inside stop immediately. They hear hushed voices. Detective Chen knocks again and identifies herself as a law enforcement officer. Marcus opens the door partially, keeping the chain lock engaged. He asks what this is about. Detective Chen explains they're investigating an incident involving a child and would like to ask him some questions. Marcus's face goes pale. He glances behind him into the apartment, then back at the detectives. He asks if he needs a lawyer. Detective Chen tells him that's his right, but they're simply trying to understand what happened to Sofia Martinez today. At the mention of Sofia's name, Marcus's hands begin trembling. He grips the doorframe to steady himself. He insists he hasn't seen Sofia today. He claims he was at work until 2 p.m., then ran errands, then came home. The detective points out that his phone records show he was near Sofia's school around dismissal time. Marcus stammers that he was just in the area, maybe driving past. He changes his story, saying he went by the school but didn't stop. He was checking to make sure Sofia got on her bus safely because Rebecca had mentioned being worried about the child walking to the bus stop alone. This explanation doesn't align with Rebecca's account. She never expressed concern about Sofia's bus routine. Detective Chen notes this discrepancy, but doesn't reveal it. Instead, she asks if Marcus would be willing to come to the station to provide a formal statement. Marcus refuses. He says he's tired and wants to go to bed. He attempts to close the door. Detective Chen asks one more question. She asks if Sofia has ever been to his apartment. Marcus hesitates too long before answering. He finally says that Sofia came over once or twice when he and Rebecca first started dating, but not recently. Rebecca wanted to keep her home life and dating life separate, he claims. The detective thanks him for his time and leaves. But she doesn't leave the complex. She positions her vehicle where she can observe Marcus's apartment while she makes phone calls. First, she contacts an assistant state attorney to discuss obtaining an emergency search warrant. The attorney explains they need more than suspicious behavior and timeline inconsistencies. They need evidence that Sofia was actually in that apartment. Detective Chen considers her options. She could wait until morning and try to get Sofia to provide more specific information about where the abuse occurred. But every hour that passes gives Marcus more time to clean and destroy evidence. She needs something now. The detective calls the hospital and speaks with the pediatric nurse who examined Sofia. She asks if they collected any evidence from Sofia's clothing. The nurse confirms they bagged everything Sofia was wearing, standard procedure for suspected abuse cases. Detective Chen requests that the clothing be sent to the crime lab for processing immediately. While waiting, Detective Chen interviews Marcus's neighbor, the woman who had spoken to the deputies earlier. The neighbor, Patricia Coleman, is a retired teacher who has lived in the complex for 12 years. She knows Marcus casually, occasionally sees him coming and going, but they've never had substantial conversations. Patricia mentions something that catches the detective's attention. About a month ago, she heard a child crying in Marcus's apartment. It was a school day, around 2 p.m., which struck her as odd because she didn't know Marcus had any children. The crying lasted about 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Patricia almost knocked on the door to check, but decided it wasn't her business. Detective Chen asks if Patricia heard anything today. Patricia thinks carefully, then remembers she did hear something around 3:30 p.m. She describes it as thumping sounds, like furniture being moved or something heavy being dropped. Then she heard what might have been a child's voice, high-pitched and upset. The sounds stopped after a few minutes, and Patricia went back to watching her television program. The detective asks Patricia if she'd be willing to provide a formal statement. Patricia agrees immediately. She explains that she worked with children her entire career and has always regretted not checking on the crying child she heard a month ago. If she had, this situation could have been prevented. At 11:30 p.m., Detective Chen receives a call from the crime lab. They've found something on Sophia's clothing. Transfer evidence on the girl's shirt includes fibers that appear to match carpet material. More significantly, they found a partial fingerprint on Sophia's jacket zipper that doesn't belong to Sophia or her mother. The print is fresh, likely left within the past 24 hours. The lab technician explains that the fingerprint's location suggests someone else zipped or unzipped Sophia's jacket for her. The print is positioned exactly where an adult's thumb would rest while manipulating the zipper pull. If they can match this print to Marcus Webb, it places him in direct physical contact with Sophia today. But Detective Chen needs Marcus's fingerprints to make a comparison. She could ask him to provide them voluntarily, but he's already refused to cooperate. She could wait until they have enough evidence to arrest him, then take his prints as part of the booking process. Or she could find another way to obtain them. The detective remembers something from Marcus's background check. He has a concealed carry permit, which required fingerprinting. Those prints would be on file with the state. Detective Chen contacts the Department of Agriculture, which handles concealed carry permits in Florida, and requests Marcus Webb's fingerprint records. Due to the emergency nature of the child abuse investigation, they agree to expedite the request. By 1:30 a.m., Detective Chen has Marcus's fingerprints from his permit application. She forwards them to the crime lab for comparison with the print found on Sophia's jacket. The analysis takes 40 minutes. At 2:10 a.m., the lab calls back with confirmation. The print on Sophia's jacket is a definitive match to Marcus Webb's right thumb. This is the evidence Detective Chen needed. Marcus told her he hasn't seen Sophia recently. He claimed he was driving past the school, but his fingerprint is on her jacket, fresh from today. He had physical contact with Sophia, and he lied about it. Detective Chen immediately begins drafting a search warrant application for Marcus's apartment. She includes the fingerprint match, the neighbor's statement about hearing a child in distress, Marcus's suspicious cleaning behavior, the phone location data, and Sophia's injuries. Together, these facts establish probable cause that evidence of child abuse exists in Marcus's residence. The assistant state attorney reviews the warrant application and approves it. At 3:15 a.m., Detective Chen appears before an on-call judge who reviews the probable cause affidavit. The judge signs the search warrant at 3:40 a.m., authorizing law enforcement to search Marcus Webb's apartment for evidence related to the abuse of Sophia Martinez. Detective Chen assembles a team. She wants crime scene technicians, evidence collection specialists, and additional detectives. They need to process this scene thoroughly because Marcus has already attempted to clean. Finding evidence will be challenging, but not impossible. Bleach destroys DNA but doesn't eliminate everything. Luminol can reveal blood evidence even after washing. Forensic techniques can uncover what people try to hide. At 4:30 a.m., the team approaches Marcus's apartment. Detective Chen knocks loudly and announces they have a search warrant. Marcus doesn't answer. She strikes again, shouting that they will force entry if necessary. Finally, the door opens. Marcus stands in the doorway wearing the same clothes from earlier. His eyes are bloodshot, and he smells strongly of cleaning chemicals. Detective Chen hands him the warrant and explains they will be searching his apartment. Marcus reads the document, his hands shaking so badly he can barely hold the paper. The team enters and begins their systematic search. The apartment is small, just a one-bedroom unit with a combined living and dining area. The carpet in the living room is damp, clearly recently shampooed. The smell of bleach is overwhelming, particularly in the bathroom. Every surface appears to have been scrubbed. Crime scene technicians begin with luminol testing. They close the blinds, darken the room, and spray the chemical reagent on the living room carpet. Under UV light, several areas glow bright blue, indicating the presence of blood. Marcus has cleaned it, but traces remain. The blood evidence shows a pattern consistent with someone bleeding while lying on the floor. Detective Chen watches Marcus's reaction to the luminol results. His face crumbles. He sinks onto the couch and puts his head in his hands. He doesn't speak, but his body language communicates defeat. He knows they've found what he tried to hide. The technicians continue their work. They find more blood traces in the bathroom, suggesting Sophia was injured badly enough to bleed in multiple locations. They discover small handprints on the wall near the floor, child-sized, positioned as though someone was trying to brace themselves or push away from something. In the bedroom, technicians find fibers on the bed that appear to match Sophia's clothing. They also discover a child's hair elastic on the nightstand, pink with a small butterfly decoration. When shown a photograph, Rebecca confirms it belongs to Sophia. She had been wearing it when she left for school that morning. The most damaging evidence comes from the bathroom trash can, which Marcus forgot to empty during his cleaning frenzy. Buried beneath other garbage, investigators find paper towels stained with blood. The amount isn't large, but it's consistent with cleaning up after someone sustained injuries from physical violence. Detective Chen also finds something else in the trash: fragments of a broken picture frame and a photograph torn into pieces. The technicians carefully reconstruct the photo. It shows Marcus and Rebecca together, smiling. But someone has violently defaced Rebecca's face in the image, scratching it out with what appears to be a knife or sharp object. This evidence suggests rage directed at Rebecca. Combined with the text messages where Marcus repeatedly tried to contact her today, a picture emerges. Marcus was angry at Rebecca. When he saw Sophia, Rebecca's daughter, he took out that anger on a defenseless child. By 6 a.m., the search is complete. The evidence team has collected blood samples, fibers, the hair elastic, the defaced photograph, cleaning supplies, and numerous other items. Everything will be processed and analyzed, but they already have enough to establish that Sophia was in this apartment and that she bled here. Detective Chen approaches Marcus, who hasn't moved from the couch. She asks if he wants to explain what happened. Marcus looks up at her with empty eyes. He asks for a lawyer. Detective Chen nods, not surprised. She places Marcus under arrest for child abuse and reads him his rights. As Marcus is handcuffed and led out of the apartment, neighbors gather in the hallway. Patricia Coleman watches with tears in her eyes. She tells Detective Chen she wishes she had called police a month ago when she first heard a child crying. Maybe Sophia would have been spared what happened yesterday. Detective Chen reassures Patricia that she's helping now by providing her statement. Sometimes people don't realize what they're witnessing until it's too late. The important thing is that Marcus will face justice for what he did. Marcus is transported to the Marion County Jail for booking. His fingerprints are retaken, photographs are captured, and he's placed in a holding cell. He exercises his right to remain silent and requests an attorney. The public defender's office is notified. Meanwhile, Detective Chen returns to the hospital where Sophia remains overnight for observation. The child is finally sleeping, sedated slightly to help her rest. Rebecca sits beside her daughter's bed, exhausted and devastated. She asks Detective Chen if Marcus really did this. The detective explains they have substantial evidence placing Sophia in Marcus's apartment and showing she was injured there. Rebecca begins crying, repeating that she had no idea. She trusted Marcus. She let him into their lives. She gave him access to her daughter. Detective Chen tells Rebecca this isn't her fault. Abusers are skilled at hiding their true nature. Marcus presented himself as trustworthy, and Rebecca had no reason to suspect otherwise. The important thing now is that Sophia is safe, and Marcus is in custody. The investigation intensifies over the following 72 hours as detectives piece together a timeline that reveals the calculated nature of Marcus Webb's actions. Phone records show that Marcus had been monitoring Sophia's routine for weeks, noting when Rebecca worked late and when the child would be vulnerable. Detective Chen conducts additional interviews with parents at Sophia's school. 3 mothers recall seeing Marcus waiting near the bus line on multiple occasions over the past month, always on days when Rebecca confirmed she was working until at least 5 p.m. He told one parent he was there to surprise his girlfriend's daughter. Another parent remembered Marcus specifically asking which bus Sophia took and what time it typically arrived at their apartment complex. The crime lab completes its analysis of the blood evidence collected from Marcus's apartment. DNA testing confirms the blood belongs to Sophia Martinez. The distribution pattern indicates she bled from injuries to her face and arms, consistent with being struck multiple times. The blood evidence directly contradicts Marcus's claim that Sophia was never in his apartment. Further analysis of Sophia's clothing reveals additional transfer evidence. Microscopic paint chips embedded in her shirt fabric match paint samples taken from Marcus's living room wall. The forensic examiner concludes that Sophia was pressed or thrown against that specific wall, with sufficient force to dislodge paint fragments. Detective Chen obtains Marcus's work records from the warehouse where he's employed. His timesheets show he requested early release on November 6th, clocking out at 1:45 p.m. instead of his scheduled 5 p.m. His supervisor notes that Marcus claimed a family emergency. This early departure gave Marcus ample time to position himself near Sophia's school before dismissal. Security footage from a convenience store 3 blocks from Sophia's school captures Marcus purchasing zip ties and duct tape at 2:35 p.m. on November 6th. The timestamp places him in the area well before school dismissal. When investigators search his apartment more thoroughly, they find a receipt for these items in his kitchen drawer, but the items themselves are never located. The implication is alarming. Rebecca provides Detective Chen with access to her home computer and discovers that Marcus had been using it to search for information about child custody laws and parental rights in Florida. The search history reveals dozens of queries about whether a mother's boyfriend could gain legal custody of her children if something happened to the mother. Other searches included phrases like, "How to discipline someone else's child," and "When does punishment become abuse?" These searches paint a picture of someone who saw himself as having authority over Sophia that he didn't actually possess. Marcus had begun viewing himself as a parental figure with rights to discipline Rebecca's daughter, despite having no legal relationship to the child whatsoever. Detective Chen interviews Marcus's co-workers and learns that he had been complaining about Rebecca's parenting for weeks. He told multiple people that Rebecca was too soft on Sophia, that the child needed stricter discipline, and that he could do a better job raising her. Co-workers describe Marcus as increasingly agitated when discussing Rebecca and Sophia, particularly after Rebecca began pulling back from the relationship. Text messages between Marcus and his own mother reveal additional concerning information. In one exchange from 2 weeks before the incident, Marcus wrote that Rebecca was talking about ending their relationship. He expressed anger that Rebecca would abandon him after he had invested so much time helping raise her daughter. His mother advised him to accept the breakup and move on. Marcus responded that he wasn't ready to let them go yet. The medical team provides Detective Chen with their complete evaluation of Sophia's injuries. Beyond the evident bruising, X-rays reveal a partially healed fracture in Sophia's left forearm that Rebecca knew nothing about. The injury is approximately 3 weeks old, placing it during the time when Marcus picked Sophia up early from school on 3 separate occasions. Dr. Patricia Hayes, a pediatric abuse specialist, reviews Sophia's medical file and provides her expert opinion. The pattern of injuries indicates sustained abuse over several weeks, not a single incident. The older fracture, the multiple bruises in various stages of healing, and the fresh injuries from November 6th all point to repeated violence. Dr. Hayes concludes that Sophia was being systematically abused during the times Marcus had access to her without Rebecca's supervision. Armed with this comprehensive evidence, the state attorney's office files upgraded charges against Marcus Webb. In addition to child abuse, he now faces charges of aggravated battery, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. The kidnapping charge stems from Marcus taking Sophia from near her apartment complex to his residence without parental permission and holding her there against her will. Marcus's attorney attempts to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors refuse. The evidence is overwhelming, and they intend to pursue maximum penalties. The assistant state attorney assigned to the case tells Detective Chen they're building toward charges that could result in decades in prison. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services works with Rebecca and Sophia to establish safety protocols and arrange counseling. Sophia begins seeing a child psychologist specializing in trauma. During her 4th session, Sophia finally speaks about what Marcus did to her. Through careful, age-appropriate questioning, Sophia describes how Marcus would pick her up from school and tell her it was a surprise for her mother. He would take her to his apartment and initially give her snacks and let her watch television. But over time, his behavior changed. He began criticizing her, telling her she was badly behaved and needed to learn respect. Sophia describes being grabbed by her arms and shaken when she asked to go home. She recounts Marcus yelling at her that she was ungrateful, that her mother didn't appreciate him, and that Sophia needed to learn discipline. The arm fracture occurred when Marcus twisted her arm behind her back as punishment for spilling juice on his couch. On November 6th, Sophia explains that Marcus was waiting near the bus stop when she got off. He told her to come with him because her mother wanted her to stay at his apartment for a while. Sophia didn't want to go, but was afraid to refuse. Once inside his apartment, Marcus became angry, accusing Sophia of telling her mother bad things about him and ruining his relationship with Rebecca. Sophia tried to leave, but Marcus blocked the door. When she started crying and asking for her mother, Marcus grabbed her and threw her against the living room wall. He told her to stop crying, or he would give her something to really cry about. When Sophia continued sobbing, Marcus struck her multiple times on her arms and back. He squeezed her wrists so tightly she thought her bones would break. After the assault, Marcus seemed to realize what he had done. He tried to clean Sophia up, washing her face and straightening her clothes. He told her that if she told anyone what happened, he would hurt her mother. He said nobody would believe her anyway because adults don't listen to children. Then he drove her back to her apartment complex and made her promise not to say anything. Sophia's testimony, provided through the child psychologist and recorded for potential court use, becomes the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Combined with the physical evidence, witness statements, and Marcus's own lies to investigators, the case against him is ironclad. 4 months after his arrest, Marcus Webb faces a preliminary hearing where a judge reviews the evidence and determines there is sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial. Marcus's defense attorney argues that the evidence is circumstantial and that Sophia's testimony is unreliable due to her age. The judge disagrees, finding that the combination of forensic evidence, witness statements, and the child's consistent account establishes a strong case. The defense makes one final attempt at a plea agreement, offering to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. The prosecution counters with an offer: plead guilty to all charges as filed, accept a sentence of 25 years in prison, and register as a violent offender upon release. Marcus consults with his attorney for several days before declining the offer. He insists on taking his case to trial. The trial begins on August 12, 2020, 9 months after Sophia's assault. The prosecution presents their evidence methodically over 5 days. Dr. Hayes testifies about the pattern of injuries and explains how the medical evidence proves sustained abuse. Crime scene technicians walk the jury through the forensic findings from Marcus's apartment. Patricia Coleman describes hearing a child in distress. Rebecca testifies about Marcus's increasing controlling behavior and his anger when she tried to distance herself from the relationship. The most powerful testimony comes from Sophia herself. Now 9 years old and having worked extensively with her therapist, Sophia takes the stand and describes what Marcus did to her. Her testimony is clear, detailed, and devastating. She identifies Marcus in the courtroom and explains that she was afraid of him, but is not scared anymore because her mother and the detectives promised he cannot hurt her now. Marcus's defense attempts to suggest that Sophia's injuries could have come from playground accidents or rough play with other children. They argue that the blood in Marcus's apartment could have been from a nosebleed during one of Sophia's earlier visits when Rebecca was present. They claim the fingerprint on Sophia's jacket proves nothing, except that Marcus had contact with her at some point, which he never entirely denied. The prosecution dismantles each argument systematically. Medical experts explain that Sophia's injuries are absolutely inconsistent with playground accidents. The blood pattern evidence proves someone was injured while lying on the floor, not from a simple nosebleed. The fingerprint, combined with Marcus's lies about when he last saw Sophia and his location data from the day of the assault, proves he had recent contact with her despite his denials. The jury deliberates for 6 hours before reaching a verdict. They find Marcus Webb guilty on all counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated battery, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. The courtroom remains silent as the verdict is read, but Rebecca begins crying quietly, holding Sophia close to her. During the sentencing phase 3 weeks later, the judge hears victim impact statements. Rebecca describes the guilt she carries for allowing Marcus into their lives and the ongoing trauma Sophia experiences. She explains that her daughter has nightmares, fears being alone, and struggles with trusting adults. Rebecca notes that simple activities like going to school or being dropped off at a friend's house now trigger anxiety in Sophia because of what Marcus did. Sophia, with her mother's support, also provides a brief statement. She tells the judge that Marcus hurt her and scared her, but that she is working hard in therapy to feel safe again. She says she wants other children to know that if someone hurts them, they should tell a trusted adult, even if the person says not to. The judge delivers his ruling. He sentences Marcus Webb to 35 years in the Florida Department of Corrections, with no possibility of parole for the first 25 years. He describes Marcus's actions as predatory, calculating, and fundamentally evil. The judge notes that Marcus specifically targeted a vulnerable child, isolated her from her mother, and inflicted sustained abuse while manipulating both Sophia and Rebecca. Additionally, Marcus must register as a violent offender and is prohibited from any contact with minors upon his eventual release. The judge orders that Marcus undergo psychological evaluation and treatment while incarcerated, though he expresses doubt that someone capable of such calculated cruelty toward a child can be rehabilitated. Marcus shows no emotion as the sentence is delivered. He is immediately remanded to custody and transferred to a state prison facility. His attorney files an automatic appeal, but legal experts consulted by Detective Chen believe the conviction will be upheld given the strength of the evidence and the proper handling of the case. Detective Chen closes her case file on Marcus Webb, but maintains contact with Rebecca and Sophia. She attends several of Sophia's therapy sessions to help the child process what happened and understand that justice was served. The detective explains to Sophia that she was courageous for eventually speaking about what Marcus did, and that her testimony helped ensure he would never hurt another child. Rebecca eventually moves to a different apartment complex, wanting a fresh start away from the location where Marcus had access to their lives. She becomes an advocate for child abuse awareness, speaking at local schools and community centers about recognizing warning signs of abusive relationships and protecting children from predators who disguise themselves as trustworthy partners. Sophia continues therapy throughout her childhood. Her psychologist reports steady progress, though the trauma will likely affect her for years to come. She struggles with trusting male authority figures and experiences periodic nightmares about being trapped. However, she also demonstrates remarkable resilience, returning to school, rebuilding friendships, and slowly regaining the sense of safety that Marcus stole from her. The fingerprint evidence that broke the case open becomes a teaching example used by the Marion County Sheriff's Office in training new investigators. Detective Chen presents the case at law enforcement conferences, emphasizing the importance of collecting all possible evidence from victims' clothing and the value of thorough forensic analysis, even when suspects attempt to destroy evidence. The case also prompts changes in school district policies regarding authorized pickup persons. Schools now require annual verification of who is permitted to pick up children and immediately notify parents via text or app notification whenever a child is signed out early by someone other than the primary guardian. 3 years after Marcus's conviction, Detective Chen receives a letter from Rebecca. She writes that Sophia is doing well, excelling in school, and has joined the soccer team. The nightmares have decreased significantly, and Sophia is learning to trust again. Rebecca thanks the detective for believing her daughter, for working tirelessly to build the case against Marcus, and for ensuring justice was served. Rebecca's letter includes a drawing from Sophia showing a police badge with a heart in the center and the words, "Thank you for keeping me safe," written in careful cursive. Detective Chen frames the drawing and keeps it in her office as a reminder of why she does this work. Marcus Webb remains incarcerated at Wakulla Correctional Institution with an earliest possible release date of August 2045. Prison records indicate he has been written up multiple times for disciplinary violations and refuses to participate in treatment programs. Fellow inmates and corrections officers describe him as bitter, maintaining that he did nothing wrong and that the system mistreated him. The case of Marcus Webb stands as a stark reminder that child predators often hide in plain sight, presenting themselves as helpful, caring partners while concealing their true intentions. The investigation demonstrated how crucial forensic evidence, particularly fingerprint analysis, can be in establishing facts when victims are too traumatized to speak about their abuse immediately. For Sofia Martinez, now a teenager working through her trauma with continued support, the case represents both the worst and best of what can happen when a child is victimized. The worst. A trusted adult exploited his access to hurt her repeatedly. The best. A dedicated detective, thorough investigation, and vigorous prosecution ensured her abuser faced full accountability for his crimes. The fingerprints Marcus left on Sophia's jacket, the evidence he thought he could bleach away, and the courage Sophia eventually found to tell her story combined to deliver justice. In Detective Chen's words, documented in the case file's closing summary, this investigation proved that even when predators work to hide their crimes, forensic science and determined investigators can uncover the truth and protect the most vulnerable among us. On March 8, 2025, home security camera captures Marcus Mitchell arriving at his house at 4:32 in the afternoon, returning from his shift at the Toyota plant. This is the same camera 4 hours and 17 minutes later, showing Marcus dragging a large black tarp from his garage to his truck bed. Inside that tarp is the body of his 29-year-old wife, Sarah. 8 months earlier, Marcus purchased life insurance policies covering $100,000 on his own life and $500,000 on Sarah's. Sarah's best friend had never heard about this policy. Neither had her mother. The insurance agent would later testify that Marcus never brought Sarah to a single appointment and provided all of her information himself. On March 8, 2025, Sarah Mitchell had been reported missing by her husband, Marcus Mitchell, just 9 hours earlier at 9:53 the previous night. Detective Harris immediately flagged this timeline as suspicious. Missing person reports filed late at night, followed by a body discovery the next morning, typically indicated one thing. Someone close to the victim knew exactly what happened and was establishing an alibi. The detectives wasted no time beginning their investigation. Their first stop was the home of Sarah's mother, Patricia Reynolds, who lived approximately 15 minutes from the crime scene on Greenwood Avenue. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe. The time was 8:32 in the morning. The detectives identified themselves and delivered the devastating news about her daughter. As the words sank in, Patricia's world spun into disorientation. The familiar scent of brewed coffee that usually brought comfort now felt overwhelming. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes, and the sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out the detectives' voices. She collapsed against the doorframe, her screams echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Officers helped her inside and waited for her to compose herself enough to answer questions, allowing her the space to feel the reality of her loss before engaging in the procedural inquiries. Patricia explained that she had last seen her daughter the previous afternoon, around 3 o'clock. Sarah had stopped by for their weekly coffee visit. They sat in the kitchen for nearly 2 hours discussing ordinary things: work schedules, upcoming holidays, and a recipe Patricia wanted to share. Nothing about Sarah's demeanor suggested anything was wrong. She seemed happy, relaxed, exactly like herself. Patricia described her son-in-law, Marcus, as a good provider who worked at the Toyota manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Bowling Green. The couple had been married for 2 years after dating for 18 months. They had recently purchased a house on Shady Grove Drive and seemed to be building a stable life together. Patricia noticed no signs of trouble in their marriage. No arguments, no tension, nothing that would indicate violence was brewing beneath the surface. Her grief appeared genuine and unguarded. She answered every question through tears, her hands shaking as she provided contact information for Sarah's closest friend. The apartment was small but tidy, with photographs of Rebecca and Sarah covering most available surfaces. Pictures from high school, college, weddings, and birthday parties. One particularly cherished photo depicted the two friends grinning with matching Halloween costumes from their freshman year at college. A prank they pulled off flawlessly on their dorm mates by pretending to swap identities for the entire day. It was a day filled with laughter and camaraderie that cemented their bond. Rebecca sat on her couch, clutching a tissue, and began answering questions before the detectives even asked them. She needed to talk. She needed someone to understand what she had been seeing for months. The apartment was small but tidy, with photographs of Rebecca and Sarah covering most available surfaces. Pictures from high school, college, weddings, and birthday parties. A friendship that spanned more than 15 years, documented in frames and magnets. Rebecca sat on her couch, clutching a tissue, and began answering questions before the detectives even asked them. She needed to talk. She needed someone to understand what she had been seeing for months. Rebecca described the early days of Sarah and Marcus's relationship as seemingly perfect. Marcus was charming and attentive during their courtship. He brought Sarah flowers, planned elaborate dates, and sent thoughtful text messages throughout the day. Sarah's friends were happy for her. After a difficult breakup 2 years before meeting Marcus, Sarah deserved someone who treated her well. But approximately 6 months into the marriage, Rebecca started noticing changes in her best friend's behavior. Sarah began canceling plans at the last minute: lunch dates, movie nights, and their weekly yoga class, always with an excuse. Marcus needed her help with something. She wasn't feeling well. Work had exhausted her. When Rebecca did manage to see Sarah, something felt different. Sarah seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone, looking over her shoulder. Her laugh didn't sound genuine anymore. The ease that had always existed between them felt strained and forced. 3 weeks before Sarah's murder, the two women met for lunch at a cafe downtown. It was one of the rare occasions Sarah didn't cancel. During their meal, as Sarah reached across the table for the salt shaker, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a dark purple bruise on her upper arm. The bruise was roughly the size and shape of fingers, like the imprints left when someone grips hard enough to leave their mark. Rebecca noticed how Sarah flinched slightly when she brushed her arm against the table, and how the skin, even though cool to the touch, seemed to throb with a muted pulse of pain. Rebecca immediately asked about it. Sarah's response came too quickly, too rehearsed. She said she fell while playing with their dog and hit the corner of the kitchen counter. Rebecca didn't believe the explanation. She had known Sarah for over a decade and could always tell when her friend was lying. The way Sarah's eyes shifted away, the slight tremor in her voice, and the defensive posture she adopted when pressed for details. But Rebecca didn't push. She wanted to respect Sarah's boundaries, even though every instinct told her something was seriously wrong. That same week, during that same lunch, Sarah asked Rebecca a question that stayed with her. She asked if Rebecca thought divorce was always the answer, or if sometimes people should just accept that marriage is hard and requires sacrifice. The question caught Rebecca off guard. Sarah had never mentioned marital problems before. Rebecca tried to probe deeper, asking what prompted such a heavy question, but Sarah immediately backtracked. She claimed she was just thinking philosophically that a coworker had been discussing her own marriage troubles. Rebecca let it drop, but the conversation haunted her. Now her best friend was dead, and that question took on horrifying new meaning. Detective Chen then revealed information that made Rebecca's face drain of color. According to a preliminary investigation, Marcus Mitchell had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Sarah 8 months earlier. Rebecca had no knowledge of this policy. Sarah had never mentioned it, despite the fact that she and Rebecca discussed virtually everything in their lives: major purchases, career decisions, family drama. A life insurance policy of that size should have been significant enough to warrant at least a casual mention. The fact that Sarah never brought it up suggested she either didn't know about it or felt uncomfortable discussing it. Armed with this crucial information about the life insurance policy, and Rebecca's observations about the bruise and Sarah's changing behavior, Detectives Harris and Chen drove directly to the Mitchell residence. The time was 10:37 in the morning. Marcus Mitchell's Ford F-150 pickup truck sat in the driveway. The lawn was freshly mowed with perfectly straight lines. The hedges were trimmed with precise edges. Garden beds showed no weeds. Everything appeared normal, suburban, unremarkable. The kind of house that belongs in a real estate advertisement. Marcus Mitchell answered the door on the second knock. He wore gray sweatpants and a wrinkled white t-shirt. His hair was slightly disheveled. His eyes showed redness around the rims, but the eyeballs themselves appeared dry. No tears stained his cheeks. No tissues clutched in his hands. He identified himself and invited the detectives inside without hesitation. The interior of the home immediately struck both investigators as unusual for someone who had just lost their spouse. The living room was immaculate, not a single item out of place. throw pillows were arranged symmetrically on the couch. Magazines were stacked in perfect alignment on the coffee table. No dishes were visible in the sink from the entryway. No clutter was anywhere. The detectives had investigated dozens of homicides over their careers. Grieving family members never maintained this level of perfect order. Grief is messy. It means unwashed dishes pile up, laundry is left in baskets, and surfaces get covered with used tissues and forgotten coffee mugs. This house looked like it was staged for showing to potential buyers. Marcus gestured for the detectives to sit. He took a seat in an armchair across from him, his posture upright and controlled. Detective Harris began with standard questions, asking Marcus to walk through his activities from the previous day. Marcus explained that he woke around 6 in the morning. He made coffee in the kitchen while Sarah remained asleep upstairs. He left for his shift at the Toyota plant around 7 o'clock. His shift ran from 7:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon. He clocked out at exactly 4:28, according to factory records. Marcus stated that when he arrived home around 5:30 in the evening, Sarah was not there. He claimed this didn't immediately concern him because Sarah often visited her mother or met up with Rebecca after her nursing shifts at the medical center. He made himself dinner, watched television, and started trying to reach Sarah around 10 o'clock when she still hadn't returned home or responded to his text messages. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. He called Patricia. He called Rebecca. Neither had seen Sarah that evening. That's when he contacted the police to file a missing person report at 9:53 at night. Marcus's delivery throughout this explanation was measured and controlled. His voice remained steady without the breaks or catches typical of fresh grief. His breathing stayed even and regular. His hands rested motionless on the arms of the chair, not fidgeting or clenching as people under stress typically did. There were no tears forming in his eyes, despite discussing his wife's disappearance and death. The detectives observed all of these details carefully, noting each absence of expected emotional response. Detective Chen asked if Marcus could think of anyone who would want to hurt his wife. Marcus responded that everyone loved Sarah. She worked as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Bowling Green Medical Center. She was kind, patient, and dedicated to helping others. She had no enemies that he knew of, no conflicts at work, no disputes with neighbors or friends. Detective Harris then pivoted to questions about the marriage itself. He asked how things had been between Marcus and Sarah recently. Marcus stated they were fine, happy, with no significant problems. Work kept them both busy, but they made time for each other when they could. Detective Chen mentioned speaking with Rebecca Hoffman earlier that morning. She brought up that Rebecca had noticed Sarah seemed stressed in recent months. Marcus acknowledged that Sarah's job was demanding. The intensive care unit meant long 12-hour shifts dealing with critically ill patients. The stress was natural, given her work environment. Then Detective Chen asked directly about the bruise Rebecca had seen on Sarah's arm 3 weeks prior. For the first time since the detectives arrived, Marcus's controlled facade showed a crack. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The muscles in his neck became more defined. He stated that Sarah had tripped over their dog and fallen against the kitchen counter. The bruise was nothing serious. Detective Harris noted that they saw no evidence of a dog in the home. No food bowls, no toys, no pet bed, no smell of an animal. Marcus explained they had to rehome the dog last month due to allergies. When asked about whose allergies, Marcus stated his own. He claimed he suddenly developed severe reactions, and they had no choice but to find the dog a new home through a rescue organization. The detectives noted this explanation, but didn't press the obvious holes in his story. Why would someone adopt a dog if they had allergies? Why would allergies develop suddenly after months of living with an animal? They filed these inconsistencies away for later. Detective Harris then asked the question directly. Did you harm your wife in any way?" Marcus's face contorted into what appeared to be anguish. His eyebrows drew together, his mouth turned downward, his shoulders hunched forward slightly. But despite this performance of distress, no tears formed in his eyes. His voice cracked as he responded, asking how they could even ask such a question. He stated that Sarah was everything to him. He loved her more than anything in the world. She was his entire world. They had their whole lives planned ahead of them. The emotional display seemed practiced, rehearsed, lacking the genuine rawness that characterized real grief. Detective Harris responded calmly, stating that someone clearly didn't feel that way about Sarah, given that she was found murdered. Marcus repeated that he didn't understand what they were implying. Detective Chen informed him that they needed him to come to the police station for a formal statement. They also needed to collect the clothing he had worn the previous day for forensic analysis. Marcus asked if he was under arrest. Detective Harris clarified that he was not being arrested at this time, but that providing a formal statement and surrendering his clothing was standard procedure in any homicide investigation where the spouse was the last known person to see the victim alive. Marcus stood slowly and said he needed to get his shoes from the bedroom. While Marcus was out of the room, Detective Chen quickly photographed the living room and kitchen areas with her phone. The smell of bleach was faint but detectable in the kitchen. Fresh cleaning supplies sat under the sink. The trash can was empty with a new liner despite it being mid-morning. The detectives drove Marcus to the Bowling Green Police Department, arriving at 11:23 in the morning. During the 15-minute drive, Marcus remained completely silent. He stared out the passenger window at the passing scenery. His affect was flat, emotionless, showing none of the anxiety or distress someone would typically display when being brought in for questioning about their spouse's murder. He didn't ask questions about the investigation. He didn't protest his innocence. He simply sat in manufactured calm that felt profoundly wrong to both experienced detectives. At the station, Marcus was placed in interview room 2. The room measured approximately 10 feet by 12 feet with gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and minimal furniture. A metal table sat in the center with 3 uncomfortable chairs. A camera mounted in the corner recorded both video and audio. The room's design was deliberately stark and uncomfortable, meant to create psychological pressure that encouraged confession. Marcus was offered water, which he accepted. Detective Harris began by reading Marcus his Miranda rights. Marcus confirmed he understood each right as explained. When asked if he wished to speak with them, Marcus stated he had nothing to hide and would answer any questions. This confidence struck the detectives as unusual. Most innocent people brought in for questioning about a spouse's murder displayed visible anxiety, even knowing they had done nothing wrong. The situation itself generated stress. Marcus showed none of that natural human response. Detective Harris opened a folder containing photographs from the crime scene. He informed Marcus that his wife's body was discovered in Riverwalk Park that morning. Marcus acknowledged he was familiar with the location. He stated that he and Sarah had visited that park dozens of times together over the years. It was one of their favorite spots for walking on weekends when the weather permitted. When asked when he last visited Riverwalk Park, Marcus claimed it had been at least a month ago, possibly longer. He couldn't recall the exact date. Detective Chen produced a receipt from her own folder. The receipt was from the Shell gas station on Porter Pike, dated the previous day at 4:47 in the afternoon. Marcus's credit card had been used to purchase $14.32 worth of regular unleaded gasoline. The Shell station on Porter Pike sat approximately 3 miles from Riverwalk Park. More importantly, that gas station was nowhere near the route between the Toyota plant where Marcus worked and his home on Shady Grove Drive. In fact, the station was in the complete opposite direction, requiring Marcus to drive at least 20 minutes out of his way. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair for the first time since the interview began. He explained that he stopped for gas on his way home from work because his fuel light had come on. When pressed about why he chose that particular station so far from both his workplace and home, Marcus claimed he took a different route home that day because traffic was bad on his usual roads. Detective Harris pointed out that 4:47 in the afternoon on a Wednesday typically wasn't peak traffic time in Bowling Green. Marcus insisted there had been an accident or construction, something that forced him to detour. Detective Harris looked directly at Marcus. "We need to talk about the life insurance policy, Marcus. The one for $500,000 you took out on Sarah 8 months ago." Marcus blinked slowly, his face mostly neutral, though his pupils betrayed a flicker of reaction. "The policy? It's just financial planning," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "Sarah and I, we were building a life together. Protecting each other was just smart." Detective Chen leaned in slightly. "Did she know about the policy, Marcus? Did the two of you actually discuss it?" Marcus nodded, a bit too quickly. "Of course she knew. We talked about it before I bought it. You know, being responsible." Detective Harris didn't move, but the weight of the question hung in the air. "Funny," he said, "because it didn't sound like she was aware of it when we spoke to her friend Rebecca and her mother. Marcus insisted he didn't kill his wife." Detective Chen then asked a question that cut through all the pretense. She asked why Marcus couldn't cry. Marcus asked what she meant. Detective Chen stated that he had been sitting in that interview room for 20 minutes, claiming he loved his wife, claiming she was his entire world, but he hadn't shed a single tear. Not one. His eyes were dry. His face showed no evidence of crying earlier that day. Even people who tried to hold themselves together for interviews typically broke down at some point when discussing their murdered spouse. Marcus responded that everyone grieves differently. Detective Harris agreed that it was true, but pointed out that Marcus hadn't grieved at all. He had performed grief with facial expressions and tone of voice, but shown no genuine emotional distress. There was a distinct difference between actual grief and theatrical grief, and Marcus was displaying the latter. Marcus's hands finally moved, clenching into fists on the metal table. He stated that the detectives didn't know what they were talking about. Detective Harris told him to help them understand then. "Walk through the previous day again, and this time don't leave anything out." Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting his day again. He woke at 6 in the morning like he did every weekday. Sarah was still asleep when he got up. He showered, got dressed in his work uniform, and went downstairs to make coffee. He poured himself a travel mug and left the house at 7 o'clock. The drive to the Toyota plant took approximately 25 minutes, depending on traffic. He clocked in at 7:28, 2 minutes before his shift officially started at 7:30. Detective Harris asked what Marcus did during his lunch break. Marcus explained that he took his lunch from 12:30 to 1:15 in the afternoon. He ate in the break room with several co-workers. They discussed the upcoming NASCAR race that weekend and complained about the overtime schedule being reduced. After lunch, he returned to his station on the assembly line where he installed door panels on Camry models. His afternoon proceeded normally until his shift ended at 4:30. Detective Chen asked Marcus to be very specific about what happened after he clocked out. Marcus stated he walked to his truck in the employee parking lot. He sat in the vehicle for a few minutes, scrolling through his phone, checking messages and social media. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot at approximately 4:38. Detective Harris interrupted to ask if anyone could verify that timeline. Marcus said the plant had security cameras in the parking lot that would show him leaving. Marcus continued that he drove toward home, but realized his fuel gauge was close to empty. He decided to stop for gas, rather than risk running out. He took an exit he didn't normally use because he saw a sign for a Shell station. That's how he ended up at the Porter Pike location. He pumped gas, paid at the pump with his credit card, and got back on the road. The whole stop took maybe 7 or 8 minutes. He arrived home around 5:35 that evening. Detective Chen asked what Marcus did when he got home and discovered Sarah wasn't there. Marcus stated he wasn't immediately concerned. He changed out of his work clothes into comfortable clothes. He checked the refrigerator to see what was available for dinner. Sarah had meal prepped chicken and vegetables earlier in the week, so he heated that up in the microwave. He ate while watching the news. After dinner, he washed his dish and put it away. He moved to the living room and watched television for several hours. Around 9:45, Marcus claimed he started wondering why Sarah hadn't come home yet or called. He sent her a text message asking where she was. When she didn't respond after 10 minutes, he called her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called again 5 minutes later with the same result. That's when he started calling other people. First her mother, Patricia, then her friend, Rebecca. Neither had heard from Sarah that evening. Patricia said Sarah left her house around 5:15 the previous afternoon. Rebecca said she hadn't spoken to Sarah in 3 days. Marcus stated that at that point he became genuinely worried. It wasn't like Sarah to be unreachable for hours. She always kept her phone charged and answered his calls or texts within a reasonable time. He decided to contact the police. He called the non-emergency line at 9:53 and reported his wife missing. The dispatcher took down all the relevant information and told him an officer would follow up. Marcus said he stayed awake until almost 3 in the morning, hoping Sarah would come home or call. He finally fell asleep on the couch. Detective Harris asked if Marcus tried to locate Sarah himself before calling police. Did he drive around looking for her car? Did he check the hospital? Did he go to any of her usual places? Marcus admitted he didn't do any of those things. He said he assumed if something was wrong, the police were better equipped to find her than he was. This struck both detectives as odd. Most spouses would immediately jump in their car and start searching. They would call every hospital within 50 miles. They would drive to friends' houses knocking on doors. Marcus had simply stayed home and watched television. Detective Chen asked Marcus to describe his relationship with Sarah in detail. Marcus stated they met through a dating app 3.5 years earlier. Their first date was at an Italian restaurant downtown. They hit it off immediately. Sarah was beautiful, smart, and compassionate. Everything he wanted in a partner. They dated for 18 months before he proposed. The proposal happened at Riverwalk Park during a sunset picnic. Sarah said yes without hesitation. They were married 4 months later in a small ceremony at a local venue with about 60 guests. After the wedding, they moved into an apartment together while saving money for a house. Sarah worked extra shifts at the hospital. Marcus took on overtime whenever the plant offered it. They saved aggressively for 14 months until they had enough for a down payment. They closed on the house on Shady Grove Drive 8 months ago. Detective Harris asked if there were any problems in the marriage. Arguments about money, intimacy, and future plans? Marcus insisted everything was fine. They rarely fought. When they did disagree, it was about minor things, like what to watch on television, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Nothing serious, nothing worth mentioning. They were building a good life together. Both had stable jobs. They talked about having children in a few years, once they were more financially secure. Detective Chen circled back to the life insurance policy. She asked Marcus to explain the exact circumstances of purchasing that policy. When did he first consider it? What prompted the decision? Did he research different companies, or did someone approach him? Marcus explained that a financial advisor came to the Toyota plant about 9 months ago, offering free consultations to employees. The advisor talked about the importance of life insurance for young couples. He met with the advisor during his lunch break one day. The advisor ran numbers showing how much coverage Marcus should carry. They discussed his income, his mortgage, his debts. the advisor recommended a $500,000 policy on each spouse. Marcus said he purchased policies on both himself and Sarah. He provided Sarah's information, including her social security number and birth date. The advisor handled all the paperwork. Marcus just signed the documents. He paid the first premium out of his checking account. Detective Harris asked if Sarah also signed paperwork. Marcus claimed the advisor said only the policyholder needed to sign in Kentucky, as long as the insured person gave verbal consent. Marcus said he told Sarah about it that evening, and she agreed it was a smart decision. Detective Chen noted that the policy on Marcus's own life was only for $100,000 according to their records, not $500,000. The policies were not equal, as Marcus had just claimed. Marcus stumbled over his response, saying maybe he misremembered the exact amounts. Detective Harris then brought up something that made Marcus noticeably uncomfortable. Cell phone records showed that Sarah's phone last pinged off a tower near Riverwalk Park at 5:48 the previous evening. Marcus had claimed he was home by 5:35. Sarah's phone placed her near the park around the same time Marcus was supposedly settling in at home. But Marcus's own phone records showed his device was also near that same tower at 5:41 in the evening. The tower covered the area, including Riverwalk Park, the Shell station on Porter Pike, and several residential streets. Marcus maintained that he stopped for gas at that Shell station. That's why his phone pinged that tower. He was nowhere near the actual park. Detective Chen pointed out that the Shell station was approximately 2.5 miles from the park. Phone towers typically have a range of 1 to 3 miles depending on obstacles and terrain. If Marcus was only at the gas station, his phone likely would have pinged a different tower. The specific tower that registered both phones suggested both Marcus and Sarah were closer to Riverwalk Park itself. Marcus insisted the detectives were reading too much into tower locations. Cell phone tracking wasn't exact science. Maybe the other towers were busy, and his phone connected to a farther one. Maybe atmospheric conditions affected the signal. He couldn't explain the technical details, but he knew he wasn't at the park. He was at the gas station, then drove straight home. Detective Harris asked if Marcus would consent to a search of his vehicle and his home. Marcus hesitated for the first time in the interview, showing genuine uncertainty. He asked if he needed a lawyer. Detective Harris stated that was his right, but also pointed out that innocent people typically had no problem consenting to searches. They wanted to prove their innocence and cooperate fully with the investigation. Guilty people asked for lawyers and refused searches because they had something to hide. Which category did Marcus fall into? Marcus sat silently for nearly 30 seconds. The detectives let the silence hang. Finally, Marcus said he would consent to searches. He had nothing to hide. He wanted them to find whoever killed his wife. Detective Chen left the interview room to arrange for forensic teams to process Marcus's truck and home. Detective Harris remained with Marcus, asking additional background questions. He asked about Sarah's job at the hospital. Did she ever mention problems with patients or their families? Had anyone made threats? Had any patient deaths resulted in complaints or lawsuits? Marcus said Sarah rarely discussed specific patient situations due to privacy laws. She would come home exhausted and stressed, but she didn't share details about individual cases. Detective Harris asked about Sarah's routine. What time did she usually get home from work? Did she work the same shift every week, or did it rotate? Marcus explained that Sarah worked 3 12-hour shifts per week, usually Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 7 in the morning until 7:30 at night. She occasionally picked up extra shifts if the unit was short-staffed. On her days off, she usually slept late, ran errands, meal prepped for the week, or met up with Rebecca or her mother. The previous day was Wednesday. Sarah wasn't scheduled to work. Marcus said she mentioned wanting to organize the garage and maybe plant some flowers in the front beds. He didn't know what she actually ended up doing because he was at work all day. He hadn't called or texted her during his shift. That wasn't unusual. They often went the whole day without communicating if they were both busy. Detective Chen returned to the interview room with an update. Forensic teams were en route to both locations. She also brought new information that significantly changed the tone of the conversation. Crime scene investigators had found something interesting in Sarah's car, which had been located in the Riverwalk Park parking lot. The vehicle was locked with Sarah's purse still inside on the passenger seat. Her phone was in the purse. Also in the vehicle was a receipt from a Walmart dated the previous day at 2:37 in the afternoon. The receipt showed Sarah purchased potting soil, annual flowers, gardening gloves, and a small hand trowel. She spent $33.16. The items were not in her car. They weren't at the park. The detectives wanted to know where those gardening supplies were. Marcus suggested maybe she stopped home and unloaded them before going back out. But that didn't make sense. If she had been home, why would she leave again? Where would she go? And why would her car end up back at the park? Detective Harris proposed a different theory. Sarah went to Walmart and bought gardening supplies intending to plant flowers at home. But she never made it home. Someone intercepted her. That someone convinced her or forced her to drive to Riverwalk Park. That someone killed her near the creek bed and left her body there. Then that someone took her car keys and moved her vehicle to the parking lot to make it look like Sarah had driven there herself. The gardening supplies were disposed of somewhere to remove evidence. Marcus shook his head, insisting that theory didn't make sense. Who would do that? Random killers didn't operate that way. If someone wanted to rob her, they would have taken her purse. If someone wanted to assault her, they wouldn't move the car afterward. The scenario the detective described sounded too planned, too calculated. It sounded like someone who knew Sarah and knew the park. Detective Chen agreed completely. It absolutely sounded like someone who knew the victim and the location well. Someone like a husband who proposed to his wife at that exact park. Marcus's face flushed red. He raised his voice for the first time, stating he didn't kill his wife. He was at work. He had an alibi. Dozens of people saw him at the plant. Detective Harris calmly pointed out that Marcus clocked out at 4:28. Sarah's phone was active until 5:48. That was a 1 hour and 20-minute window. The drive from the Toyota plant to Riverwalk Park took approximately 18 minutes. Marcus had plenty of time to intercept Sarah, kill her, stage the scene, and still make it home by the time he claimed. Detective Chen added another detail that made Marcus go silent. Sarah had defensive wounds on her hands, scratches and broken fingernails indicating she fought her attacker. The medical examiner would collect DNA from under those fingernails. If Marcus had nothing to hide, he should have no problem providing a DNA sample for comparison. Marcus asked if he was being accused. Detective Harris stated they were simply gathering evidence and eliminating possibilities. Providing DNA would help clear him if he was innocent. Marcus agreed to provide a DNA sample. A technician came into the interview room with a buccal swab kit. Marcus opened his mouth and allowed the inside of his cheek to be swabbed. The sample was sealed in an evidence bag and labeled. The technician left. Detective Harris informed Marcus that preliminary results would take at least 48 hours, but expedited analysis might provide answers sooner. Marcus asked if he could leave. Detective Chen said not yet. They had more questions. She asked Marcus to describe the last conversation he had with Sarah. Marcus said it was brief the morning before he left for work. Sarah was still in bed. He kissed her forehead and said he loved her. She mumbled something back, still half asleep. That was it. Nothing unusual or memorable. Detective Chen asked if they had argued recently about anything. Marcus insisted they hadn't. Their relationship was stable and conflict-free. Detective Harris brought up the statement from Rebecca about Sarah asking if divorce was always the answer. Marcus claimed he knew nothing about that. Sarah never mentioned divorce to him, never even hinted at unhappiness. If she was having doubts about their marriage, she kept them completely hidden from him. He seemed genuinely surprised by this information, or at least performed surprise convincingly. Detective Chen shifted topics to Marcus's activities the evening Sarah disappeared. She asked him to be very specific about what he watched on television. Marcus said he watched the local news from 6 to 7. Then he switched to a home improvement show on HGTV. After that, he scrolled through Netflix and settled on a documentary about space exploration. He couldn't remember the exact title. He watched it until around 9:30, then started trying to reach Sarah. The detectives asked if Marcus used his computer or tablet that evening. He said he briefly checked Facebook on his phone around 8 o'clock. He scrolled through his feed for maybe 10 minutes, but didn't post anything or interact with anyone. Detective Harris asked if they could examine Marcus's phone. Marcus unlocked it and handed it over without hesitation. Detective Harris scrolled through recent activity. The Facebook claim checked out. There was activity on the app at 8:07 in the evening. But there was also something else. Marcus's search history from the previous week showed several concerning queries. He had searched for information about life insurance payouts after suspicious deaths. He searched for how long police investigations typically take. He searched for whether life insurance companies investigate beneficiaries. He also searched for hiking trails in the Riverwalk Park area and the specific closing times for the park. All of these searches occurred in the 5 days leading up to Sarah's murder. When confronted with this search history, Marcus claimed he was just curious. After purchasing the life insurance policies, he wanted to understand how they worked. The searches about police investigations were related to a true crime podcast he had been listening to. The searches about Riverwalk Park were because he was thinking about taking Sarah there for an anniversary picnic. Everything had an innocent explanation, according to Marcus. None of it meant he was planning to kill his wife. Detective Chen asked why Marcus cleaned the house so thoroughly if he was supposedly distraught about his missing wife. Marcus claimed he cleaned that morning after the police called to inform him a body had been found. He needed something to do with his hands. Cleaning helped him process his emotions. Detective Harris pointed out that the smell of bleach in the kitchen was quite strong. Marcus must have used a significant amount. What exactly was he cleaning? Marcus said he scrubbed the counters, the sink, the floor. He did it obsessively because he couldn't sit still. Detective Chen asked if forensic teams would find blood in that kitchen. Marcus's eyes widened. He asked why there would be blood. Detective Chen didn't answer directly. She just repeated the question. Would they find blood? Marcus insisted they wouldn't because nothing happened in that kitchen. Sarah wasn't killed there. She was killed at the park. The detectives noted his phrasing. He stated with certainty where Sarah was killed, despite claiming to have no knowledge of the murder. Detective Harris asked Marcus to explain how he knew Sarah was killed at the park versus killed elsewhere and dumped there. Marcus backtracked, saying he assumed that's what happened based on what the detectives told him. He didn't actually know. He was just guessing. Detective Harris pointed out that they never specified where Sarah died. They only said her body was found at the park. Marcus was making assumptions that suggested guilty knowledge. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, with the detectives circling back to inconsistencies and pressing Marcus on timeline details. His story remained mostly consistent, but small cracks appeared. He couldn't remember what color shirt he wore to work. He couldn't recall if he locked the door when he left that morning. He wasn't certain whether he took his lunch break at 12:30 or 12:45. These minor memory gaps were normal, except Marcus had been absolutely certain about other details. Selective memory often indicated deception. Finally, Detective Chen informed Marcus that he was free to go, but needed to remain available for follow-up questions. He should not leave the Bowling Green area without informing them first. His truck would be held for processing, but they would arrange a ride home for him. Marcus asked how long they would keep his vehicle. Detective Harris said at least 72 hours, depending on what forensics found. Marcus nodded and stood to leave. Before he walked out, Detective Harris made one final statement. He told Marcus that they would find the truth. Physical evidence didn't lie. DNA didn't lie. Cell phone records didn't lie. If Marcus killed his wife, they would prove it. If someone else killed her, they would prove that too. But the evidence would tell the story, one way or another. Marcus left without responding. After Marcus departed, the two detectives sat in the interview room reviewing their notes. Detective Chen stated the obvious. Marcus Mitchell killed his wife. Every instinct and years of experience told her he was guilty. But instinct wasn't enough. They needed hard evidence. Detective Harris agreed. The circumstantial evidence was strong. Opportunity, means, motive through the life insurance policy. But they needed forensics to tie Marcus directly to the murder scene. The detectives walked down the hallway to the evidence processing area, where items from both crime scenes were being analyzed. The forensic team working on Sarah's clothing had already made a significant discovery. Her jacket had traces of carpet fibers that didn't match anything in her own vehicle. The fibers were gray with a specific weave pattern. The team would compare them to carpeting in Marcus's truck and the Mitchell home. Sarah's fingernail scrapings showed biological material that appeared to be skin cells. DNA analysis was already underway. Under magnification, the cells appeared to have come from scratches rather than casual contact. Sarah had clawed her attacker hard enough to get skin under her nails. If that DNA matched Marcus, it would be devastating evidence against him. The ligature marks on Sarah's neck showed a specific pattern. She had been strangled with something that left parallel impressions approximately 1 inch apart. Not hands, not a rope, but something else. The medical examiner theorized it might be a belt or a strap of some kind. The team processing Marcus's truck and home would be looking for any item that could match those marks. Detective Harris received a call from the team at the Mitchell residence. They had found something in the garage. The gardening supplies Sarah purchased from Walmart were hidden in a storage bin under a tarp in the corner of the garage. The soil bag had been opened. The flowers were wilting. The gloves and trowel still had price tags attached. This directly contradicted Marcus's suggestion that Sarah might have stopped home to drop off her purchases. Why would someone carefully hide new gardening supplies in the garage? Unless that someone was trying to conceal evidence that Sarah had come home. Unless that someone needed to explain away why those items weren't in Sarah's car at the park. The detectives immediately recognized the significance. This proved Sarah had been home after her Walmart trip. Someone at that house saw her. Someone at that house had the opportunity to harm her. The forensic team also found something else in the garage. A work belt belonging to Marcus showed fresh cleaning. The leather was damp and smelled strongly of saddle soap. Someone had scrubbed it recently and thoroughly. The belt was sent for analysis to see if it matched the ligature pattern on Sarah's neck. If microscopic traces of Sarah's DNA remained in the leather grain despite cleaning, it would provide the physical link investigators needed. Detective Chen's phone buzzed with a text from the medical examiner. Preliminary autopsy results were ready. The detectives drove to the county morgue, arriving at 3:17 in the afternoon. Dr. Patricia Walsh met them in her office with a thick file folder. She explained that Sarah Mitchell died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. The specific injury pattern indicated sustained pressure applied for approximately 3 to 4 minutes. Death would not have been instantaneous. Sarah would have remained conscious and struggling for at least 90 seconds before losing consciousness. The defensive wounds on Sarah's hands were extensive. Multiple fingernails were broken below the quick indicating violent struggle. Bruising on her arms showed she had been grabbed and restrained forcibly. The bruising pattern on her upper arms matched hand-sized grips. The person who killed Sarah held her down or held her in place while strangling her. This wasn't a quick, impulsive act. This was sustained, deliberate murder that required physical strength and determination, while the victim fought desperately to survive. Dr. Walsh also noted something else significant. Sarah had a partially digested meal in her stomach. Based on the level of digestion, she had eaten approximately 2 to 3 hours before death. The stomach contents included chicken and vegetables consistent with the meal prep food Marcus said was in their refrigerator. This suggested Sarah had been home and eaten before going to or being taken to the park. It supported the theory that she had contact with someone at her house before her death. The detectives thanked Dr. Walsh and returned to the station. They now had a timeline for her. Sarah went to Walmart at 2:37 in the afternoon. She drove home sometime after that. She brought her gardening supplies inside where someone hid them in the garage. She ate a meal of chicken and vegetables. Then, sometime between 5 and 6 in the evening, she was strangled to death. Her body was taken to Riverwalk Park and left near the creek. Her car was moved to the parking lot. Her phone was placed in her purse to make it appear she had driven there herself. The only person who had access to the house, access to Sarah, and whose phone placed him near the park during the critical time window was Marcus Mitchell. The only person with a clear financial motive through a massive life insurance policy was Marcus Mitchell. The only person who showed no genuine grief despite claiming to love his wife desperately was Marcus Mitchell. The case against him was building piece by piece. Detective Harris convened a briefing with the full investigative team at 4:30 in the afternoon on March 9th. Forensic analysts, crime scene technicians, and the lead prosecutor gathered in the conference room to review all accumulated evidence. The case needed to be airtight before they could make an arrest. Circumstantial evidence alone wouldn't guarantee a conviction. They needed physical proof connecting Marcus Mitchell directly to his wife's murder. The forensic supervisor presented findings from Marcus's Ford F-150 pickup truck. The vehicle's interior had been recently cleaned with particular attention paid to the passenger seat and floor mat areas. Chemical testing revealed traces of blood on the passenger side door handle despite visible cleaning attempts. The blood was too degraded for immediate typing, but sufficient sample remained for DNA analysis. Results would be available within 24 to 48 hours. More significantly, fibers recovered from Sarah's jacket matched carpet fibers from the truck bed. Marcus's pickup had a spray-in bed liner installed over factory carpeting. Most of the original carpet was covered, but edges remained exposed near the wheel wells. The fiber match indicated Sarah's body had contact with that specific area of the truck. This directly contradicted Marcus's claim that he never saw Sarah after leaving for work that morning. Investigators also found fresh scratches on the truck's tailgate. The scratches formed a pattern consistent with something heavy being dragged across the surface. Microscopic paint transfer analysis showed the scratches were made within the past 48 hours based on oxidation levels. The detectives theorized Marcus had dragged Sarah's body from the tailgate into the truck bed before transporting her to the park. The team processing the Mitchell home reported their findings next. The work belt from the garage was a critical piece of evidence. Despite aggressive cleaning, forensic analysis revealed minute traces of epithelial cells embedded in the leather's grain. The belt measured 1.2 inches wide with a distinctive textured pattern from its metal buckle and prong. When photographed and measured, this pattern aligned perfectly with the ligature marks on Sarah Mitchell's neck. DNA results from the epithelial cells would take additional time, but the physical match between belt and injury pattern was extremely compelling. The detectives also noted that Marcus had specifically cleaned this one belt while leaving other tools and equipment in the garage dusty and untouched. The selective cleaning indicated consciousness of guilt. He knew that specific item needed attention because he had used it to kill his wife. Additional evidence from the house included the couple's home computer. Digital forensics specialists had extracted the complete browser history and file structure. Marcus's user account showed he had researched strangulation methods 6 days before Sarah's murder. Specifically, he had visited websites discussing how long it takes for strangulation to cause death and whether victims can scream during the attack. He had also researched how to clean blood from vehicle interiors and whether bleach destroys DNA evidence. These searches were conducted during daytime hours when Sarah would have been at work. Marcus had used private browsing mode, but forensic tools recovered the cached data from system files. The searches demonstrated premeditation and planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden argument that escalated. Marcus had spent days researching how to kill his wife and cover up the evidence. Detective Chen shared findings from Sarah's phone records. Text messages between Sarah and Rebecca from the week before the murder showed Sarah expressing concern about Marcus's behavior. She wrote that he had been asking strange questions about her work schedule and what time she typically arrived home on her days off. She mentioned that he seemed obsessed with her location, constantly asking where she was going and when she would return. One text message from 5 days before her death read that Marcus had asked Sarah to update her life insurance beneficiary information. He claimed the insurance company sent a form requiring her signature. Sarah told Rebecca she found this odd because she didn't remember agreeing to life insurance in the first place. Rebecca had responded asking if Sarah wanted her to come over. Sarah declined, saying she was probably overthinking things, and Marcus was just trying to be financially responsible. This text exchange proved Marcus had lied during his interview. He claimed Sarah knew about the life insurance policy and had agreed to it. In reality, Sarah was confused and suspicious about paperwork Marcus was pressuring her to sign. The insurance company later confirmed that no such beneficiary update form existed. Marcus had fabricated that story to obtain Sarah's signature on documents she didn't fully understand. The prosecutor reviewed all evidence and determined they had sufficient probable cause for an arrest warrant. The combination of physical evidence, digital evidence, financial motive, and timeline inconsistencies created a compelling case. The prosecutor drafted the warrant application citing murder in the first degree with aggravating circumstances of financial gain. A judge reviewed the application and signed the warrant at 6:45 that evening. Detectives Harris and Chen drove to the Mitchell residence with backup officers at 7:20 in the evening. Marcus's truck was still impounded, but a co-worker had given him a ride home earlier. Lights were visible inside the house. The detectives approached the front door with arrest warrant in hand. Detective Harris knocked firmly. Marcus opened the door still wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt from earlier. His expression showed surprise at seeing the detectives return so soon. Marcus Mitchell, you are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Mitchell. The detectives read him his rights again as they placed handcuffs on his wrists. Marcus protested, asking what evidence they had. He insisted they were making a mistake. He demanded to speak with a lawyer. Detective Chen informed him he would have that opportunity at the station. For now, he needed to come with them without resistance. Marcus complied, walking to the police vehicle without further argument. During the drive to the station, Marcus sat silently in the back seat. Unlike earlier when he stared out the window with artificial calm, now he fidgeted constantly. His leg bounced anxiously. His breathing quickened. The performance of control had crumbled now that actual consequences were imminent. This was the first genuine emotional response the detectives had witnessed from him all day. At the station, Marcus was processed through booking. His photograph was taken. His fingerprints were recorded. His personal belongings were inventoried and secured. He was provided with jail clothing and placed in a holding cell. He declined to make any statements without an attorney present. A public defender was contacted and agreed to meet with Marcus the following morning. While Marcus sat in his cell, Detective Harris received the preliminary DNA results from the lab. The skin cells recovered from under Sarah's fingernails belonged to Marcus Mitchell. The probability of the sample belonging to anyone else was less than 1 in 7 billion. Sarah had scratched her husband hard enough during her murder to leave his DNA embedded under her nails. This was the definitive physical link between Marcus and the crime. The blood recovered from Marcus's truck door handle also matched Sarah's DNA profile. Despite his cleaning efforts, enough sample remained for positive identification. Sarah had been in that truck bleeding. The only explanation was that Marcus had transported her body in his vehicle exactly as investigators theorized. Every piece of physical evidence corroborated the prosecution's timeline of events. Detective Chen compiled the complete case file for the prosecutor's office. The file documented the timeline of Sarah's final day. She had left her mother's house at 5:15 in the afternoon, after their weekly coffee visit. She drove to Walmart, arriving at 2:23, based on parking lot security footage. She shopped for 27 minutes, purchasing gardening supplies. She left Walmart at 2:51, according to the timestamp on her receipt. Sarah drove home, arriving at approximately 3:10, based on traffic camera footage, showing her vehicle on nearby streets. She brought her gardening purchases into the garage. She went inside the house and prepared food from the meal prep containers in the refrigerator. She ate while likely catching up on household tasks or relaxing on her day off. At some point between 4:30 and 5 in the afternoon, Marcus came home from work. The detectives theorized that Marcus parked his truck in the garage as usual. Sarah would have had no reason to be alarmed by her husband arriving home. Marcus had planned this carefully, waiting for a day when Sarah wasn't working and wouldn't be missed for several hours. He had already researched his method. He had already established his motive through the life insurance policy. He had already decided this was the day his wife would die. The confrontation likely happened quickly. Marcus grabbed the work belt from its hook in the garage. He approached Sarah from behind while she was distracted. He looped the belt around her neck and pulled tight. Sarah fought desperately. She scratched his arms and hands, drawing blood and skin cells under her nails. She struggled violently enough to cause defensive injuries to her own hands as she clawed at the belt, cutting off her air supply. Marcus maintained pressure for 3 to 4 minutes, according to the medical examiner's analysis. He held the belt tight while Sarah's struggles gradually weakened. He continued even after she lost consciousness, ensuring she would not survive. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was cold, calculated execution of his wife in their family home, while she believed she was safe. After Sarah was dead, Marcus faced the problem of disposing of her body and creating an alibi. He had already decided on Riverwalk Park as the dump site. The location held sentimental value from their relationship, which would seem tragically ironic to investigators. Marcus wrapped Sarah's body in a tarp from the garage. He dragged her to his truck and lifted her into the bed. This created the scratches on his tailgate and deposited the fiber evidence. Marcus drove to Riverwalk Park, arriving at approximately 5:41, based on cell tower data. He backed his truck close to the walking trail near the creek. He removed Sarah's body from the truck bed and carried or dragged her to the location where she was eventually found. He positioned her face down in the dirt near the water. He returned to his truck and used bottled water to rinse visible blood from the tailgate and bed liner. Marcus then faced another problem. Sarah's car was at home. If she supposedly disappeared while out somewhere, her car couldn't be in the garage. He drove back to his house, arriving around 6. He moved Sarah's car from the garage to the street. He drove the car back to Riverwalk Park, arriving around 6:20. He parked in the parking lot, placed Sarah's purse on the passenger seat with her phone inside, locked the doors, and walked back to where his truck was hidden. Marcus drove home again, arriving around 6:45. He hid the gardening supplies Sarah had purchased because their presence in plain sight would contradict the story of her disappearing while out running errands. He scrubbed his work belt, attempting to remove Sarah's DNA. He cleaned his truck's interior, focusing on areas where Sarah's body or blood made contact. He mopped the garage floor and wiped down surfaces. He took a shower, washing Sarah's blood from his hands and arms. By 8 o'clock, Marcus had completed his cover-up. He spent the evening watching television and establishing his alibi of being home alone. He waited until almost 10 before calling Sarah's phone, knowing it would go to voicemail since the phone was locked in her car. He called Patricia and Rebecca, creating the appearance of a concerned husband looking for his missing wife. He filed the missing person report at 9:53, carefully noting the time to establish his cooperation with police. Everything was planned. Everything was calculated. Marcus believed he had committed the perfect crime. He had a solid alibi through his work shift. He had eliminated physical evidence through cleaning. He had staged the scene to suggest Sarah had driven to the park alone, where something happened to her. He had established himself as the worried husband desperately seeking his missing wife. He would wait a respectful period after her death, then quietly collect the $500,000 life insurance payout and move on with his life. What Marcus didn't anticipate was how quickly investigators would identify him as the primary suspect. He didn't account for Rebecca's observations about Sarah's bruises and changed behavior. He didn't realize Patricia would remember that Sarah seemed happy and gave no indication of planning to go anywhere that evening. He didn't consider that his own performance of grief would be so transparently fake that detectives would immediately recognize his guilt. Most critically, Marcus didn't understand how advanced forensic science had become. He believed cleaning with bleach and soap would eliminate evidence. He didn't know that DNA could be recovered from microscopic samples. He didn't realize that fiber evidence could place Sarah's body in his truck. He didn't consider that cell tower data would contradict his timeline. He thought he was clever enough to outsmart modern investigative techniques. He was wrong. The case against Marcus Mitchell was presented to a grand jury on March 15th. The grand jury heard testimony from Detective Harris, the medical examiner, and forensic specialists. They reviewed photographs, DNA reports, cell phone records, and digital evidence. After 3 hours of deliberation, the grand jury returned an indictment on charges of murder in the first degree, with special circumstances of lying in wait and murder for financial gain. Both special circumstances made Marcus eligible for enhanced sentencing. Marcus remained in Warren County Jail without bond. His public defender filed motions challenging the admissibility of certain evidence, but the judge denied most of these motions. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The digital evidence demonstrated premeditation. The financial motive was clear and documented. The prosecution had built an airtight case that would be nearly impossible to defend against. 6 weeks after his arrest, Marcus's attorney approached the prosecutor with a plea offer. Marcus was willing to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole. The prosecutor rejected this offer immediately. The evidence supported first-degree murder charges, and the victim's family deserved full justice. There would be no plea deal that reduced Marcus's culpability or minimized his crime. The trial was scheduled for September 22nd, 2025. Jury selection took 3 days. The prosecution and defense questioned dozens of potential jurors, seeking 12 people who could fairly evaluate the evidence. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 23 to 68. All confirmed they could impose a life sentence if evidence warranted. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the timeline and evidence methodically. The prosecutor described Sarah Mitchell as a dedicated nurse, loving daughter, and loyal friend who had her entire life stolen by the one person who promised to protect her. The prosecutor explained how Marcus Mitchell had carefully planned his wife's murder, motivated by greed and enabled by Sarah's trust in her husband. The defense's opening statement was brief. Marcus's attorney argued that the prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. They claimed the DNA under Sarah's nails could have come from innocent contact between spouses. They suggested the cleaned belt was simply Marcus doing chores and had no connection to the murder. They proposed that an unknown third party killed Sarah at the park, and Marcus was being railroaded because police needed to solve the case quickly. The prosecution called 23 witnesses over 8 days of testimony. Patricia Reynolds testified about her last visit with Sarah and how happy her daughter seemed. Rebecca Hoffman testified about the bruise she saw and Sarah's question about whether divorce was always necessary. Co-workers from the Toyota plant testified about Marcus's behavior the day of the murder. Several noted he seemed distracted and checked his phone more frequently than usual. The medical examiner walked the jury through Sarah's injuries in detail. She explained how the ligature marks on Sarah's neck matched the pattern of Marcus's work belt. She described the defensive wounds, proving Sarah fought for her life. She presented the timeline of Sarah's death based on stomach contents and lividity patterns. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence. They explained how skin cells under Sarah's fingernails positively matched Marcus Mitchell. They described the blood found in his truck despite cleaning attempts. They discussed the fiber evidence linking Sarah's body to the truck bed. Each piece of physical evidence was presented with scientific certainty that left no room for doubt. Digital forensic specialists testified about Marcus's internet searches. The jury saw screen captures of his research into strangulation methods, cleaning blood, and destroying evidence. They saw the timeline of searches occurring in the week before Sarah's murder. The premeditation was undeniable. Marcus had spent days planning how to kill his wife and get away with it. The insurance agent who sold Marcus the policy testified about their interaction. He confirmed that Marcus specifically requested a $500,000 policy on Sarah, but only $100,000 on himself. He stated this was unusual because spouses typically insured themselves equally. He also testified that Marcus never brought Sarah to any appointment, and that Marcus provided all of her information himself, including her signature on documents. Detective Harris provided the most comprehensive testimony spanning 2 full days. He walked the jury through the entire investigation, from the discovery of Sarah's body to Marcus's arrest. He explained every inconsistency in Marcus's statements. He detailed the cell tower evidence placing both Marcus and Sarah near the park at the critical time. He described Marcus's complete lack of genuine emotional response during interviews. His testimony painted Marcus as a calculating killer who showed no remorse. The defense called only 2 witnesses. A forensic scientist they hired suggested contamination could explain the DNA evidence, though she admitted under cross-examination that contamination was unlikely given the multiple independent samples. A psychiatrist testified that some people process grief internally and may not display expected emotional responses. The prosecution easily dismantled both testimonies with pointed questions and reference to established science. Marcus's attorney ultimately decided not to put Marcus himself on the stand. The risk was too great. The prosecution would destroy him under cross-examination. His flat affect and inability to show genuine emotion would convince the jury of his guilt more effectively than any evidence. Keeping him silent was the only strategic option, though it denied the jury any explanation in his own words. Closing arguments began on October 7th. The prosecutor systematically reviewed every piece of evidence. She reminded the jury that Marcus had motive through the insurance policy. He had opportunity during the critical time window. He had means through access to his wife and the murder weapon. His own DNA was under her fingernails from her desperate struggle. His own internet searches proved he planned every detail. His own cleaned belt matched the marks on her neck. The prosecutor ended by asking the jury to deliver justice for Sarah Mitchell, a young woman whose only crime was trusting her husband, a woman who fought for her life, while the man who promised to love and cherish her choked the breath from her body, a woman whose family and friends would never see her again because Marcus Mitchell valued $500,000 more than his wife's life. The defense's closing argument lasted only 30 minutes. Marcus's attorney argued reasonable doubt based on the lack of eyewitnesses and reliance on circumstantial evidence. He suggested police tunnel vision prevented them from considering other suspects. He claimed the prosecution's timeline had gaps that created uncertainty. His argument felt hollow and unconvincing even to observers in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. They requested to review the DNA evidence, the photographs of the work belt and Sarah's injuries, and Marcus's internet search history. They asked clarifying questions about cell tower technology. At 2:37 in the afternoon on October 9th, they informed the bailiff they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled with Sarah's family and friends, investigators who worked the case, and members of the media covering the trial. Marcus was brought in wearing a suit his attorney had provided. His face showed no emotion as the jury filed in. The judge asked if they had reached a unanimous verdict. The foreperson confirmed they had. The clerk read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, the jury found Marcus Mitchell guilty. On the special circumstance of lying in wait, guilty. On the special circumstance of murder for financial gain, guilty. Patricia Reynolds sobbed openly in the gallery. Rebecca held her hand tightly. Marcus showed no reaction whatsoever. He simply stared straight ahead, as though the verdict had nothing to do with him. Sentencing was scheduled for November 3rd. The prosecution requested life without the possibility of parole based on the special circumstances and the calculated nature of the crime. The defense requested the minimum sentence, arguing Marcus had no prior criminal history. Victim impact statements were heard from Patricia, Rebecca, and 3 of Sarah's co-workers. Patricia spoke directly to Marcus. She described the daughter she raised and how much joy Sarah brought to everyone who knew her. She explained that Sarah had trusted Marcus completely and that he exploited that trust in the most evil way imaginable. She said she would never forgive him and hoped he spent every remaining day of his life remembering what he had taken from the world. Marcus stared at the table in front of him, showing nothing. The judge reviewed the evidence and the jury's findings. He stated that Marcus Mitchell had committed one of the most cold-blooded murders he had encountered in 30 years on the bench. The planning, the execution, the cover-up, and the complete absence of remorse demonstrated an individual devoid of basic human empathy. The judge sentenced Marcus Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus was immediately remanded to state custody to begin serving his sentence. As guards escorted Marcus from the courtroom, he looked back once at the gallery. His eyes met Patricia's for a brief moment. Still no emotion, no apology, no acknowledgement of the devastation he had caused. He turned away and disappeared through the door leading to the cells below the courthouse. It was the last time Sarah's family saw the man who murdered her. Marcus Mitchell is currently incarcerated at Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville. He is 53 years old and will die in prison. He has filed multiple appeals claiming ineffective counsel and challenging the DNA evidence. Every appeal has been denied. The courts found the evidence overwhelming and the trial fair. There is no pathway to freedom for Marcus Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell's family established a scholarship fund in her name at the nursing school she attended. The scholarship supports students pursuing careers in intensive care nursing. Patricia remains active in victim advocacy, working with families who have lost loved ones to domestic violence. Rebecca speaks at events about recognizing warning signs in relationships and trusting instincts when something feels wrong. The case of Marcus Mitchell stands as a reminder that evil can hide behind ordinary appearances. A suburban house, a stable job, a seemingly normal marriage. But beneath the surface was a man capable of murdering his wife for money and attempting to fake grief to cover his crime. The detectives who investigated the case credited their success to following the evidence wherever it led, and recognizing that Marcus's performance of emotion was just that, a performance lacking any genuine human feeling.